1. Born in Chaos by E.M. Buggin. Chapter 1. Born Depraved. Depravity is a widely affecting and yet seldom understood or appreciated concept. Its scope is grand, and it saturates even the unliving and unbreathing things of the dirt and sea. It wanders about hearts in the shadows, making itself known only in times of war or lust or chaos. And yet the deeply tragic state of all life acts as a directive point. Not life itself being such a beacon, but the depravity with which it carries. As the dark sky makes all widely aware of the absence of sunlight, or as winter reminds land and life of summer. For depravity to be known, experienced, and hated, there then remains the need for a wholeness, for perfection. For without perfection, the want and disgust and despair of the darkness within has no power. Indeed, all would do what was right in their own eyes, with no will for the contrary, nor appreciation for beautiful things like peace. And so, this tale befalls within a kingdom abounding in such depravity. To first learn of those who are chief among most others as being in a poor state is no simple thing. Being creatures of war and brutal in their conduct with others, cruel even, the red-skinned Orcan are considered vile beasts by most neighboring kinds for their predisposition to violence and lack of care for life and sacred things. They are of the larger kinds of those with intelligence, standing near 12 feet for the average male and weighing a great sum. Their harsh appearance aids in the disdain others feel for them. All are bald and adorned with horns on their heads and faces with small dark eyes. The Orcan have a single mindset, war. They are born into it, raised by it, and led by it. War rules their society. These are they that occupy the depraved kingdom of which this tale is written. While the kingdom's name is the Land of Crook, named after its founder, the true name of it, if it were to be called according to its dealings and people, would be the Kingdom of Chaos. And amidst this kingdom, hope and light, the inverse of its depravity, began to rise within the hearts of a select few. And indeed, this grand tale of kings and kingdoms begins with these, the chosen and the redeemed. Presently, within the grand forested region of Crook that borders the northernmost reaches of its middle, a small red foot pressed into white snow. The girl to whom the foot belonged dwelt in the dark forest, the region that began at the heart of the land and stretched northward until the mountains that shouldered the country. The girl was an Orcan child, called an Orkling in her culture. Being of a race replete with depravity, the child's future was bleak. Strong Orcan males were typical to join in warfare, the females being they that reared Orkling and provided for the various economic needs of the kingdom, which is a fine and noble fate for any typical people. This child, however, was of a savage sect within the kingdom, an unusual people. Indeed, the kingdom itself was fractured. 4 tetrarchs reigned within the land, each claiming to be king of their followers, the worst of which, in practice and governance, was called the Savage Kingdom, to which the child in the snow belonged. She stood, awed by the frozen white beneath her. Being young, merely 2 years without the female that birthed her, for Orkling are born large and already walking, she had never experienced that which was before her. The savages, the Orcan folk she was born unto, dwelt exclusively within the forestry of the dark forest region, which, despite its northern position, was protected from the elements of winter. The trees kept out the density of the sky's frozen offerings, and the great fires that the Orcan built and sustained perpetually destroyed the power of the cold winds that beat upon the trees from the surrounding plains. The child had wandered from her clearing and the fire that blazed in the middle. There she had a tent wherein her parents also lived. She was the youngest of that pair's children, the rest of whose whereabouts were unknown to them. Orcan are not a good species. They do not care for their own, and are even violent toward each other. Indeed, an Orcan could live to 1,000 years or more if battle had not prevented any recorded Orcan from accomplishing such a thing. The child stood in the snow, still within the reaches of the trees, gazing at the wall of white before her. She faced south, and the winds were blowing wildly about the land, sweeping up the snow that was falling. The air was frigid, and she shivered for it. But something had beckoned unto her and drew her near. Such a beckoning was not a thing of childish wandering, but something placed upon her heart to come nigh. And thus, doomed with a poor fate in the years before her, the child stood still, examining the unknown. For her call, she had felt fear enough to keep herself from coming into the snowy land before her. The trees were all she knew, and thus she stayed for some time before collapsing from the cold and sinking into the snow. Her red face had preceded the rest of her, and she neared death, for she was young and weak. It was then, as if for the affirmation of her helpless estate, that two outstretched arms reached into the snow and, wrapping around the downed Orkling, caught her up out of the cold mire. She then dangled in a close embrace, the stranger that had come to her, carrying her deeper into the forest, beyond the unknown that had overwhelmed her. Walking with haste for a while, the stranger came upon a small clearing, and laying her gently upon the ground, formed a fire. He took off his cloak and swaddled her, bringing her as near the fire as it was needed. And sitting upon the twigged ground, he placed her in his lap and held her through the night that had come upon them. In the morn, when the sun began to rise from behind the mountains in the east, the child had awoken and was restored. Being warmed by the evening of care, she was startled upon the sight of the stranger, for he was of a different kind than her, and she had only ever beheld the sight of Orcan and beasts.
She gasped and threw off the cloak that was about her. She struggled to stand so she could flee from his embrace, and helping her become free so she would not fall into the fire, the stranger turned and released his grip upon her. She fled swiftly from him, running into the darkness of the morning forest. Yet he stood and patiently came behind her, walking with long strides so that he kept her running pace. Noticing the futility of her fleeing, she took to a nearby tree, scaling it in a manner taught her by being a dweller of the forest. Upon seeing this, and not for his inability to climb after her, the stranger subsided in his pursuit and returned to the fire, which could be seen from the tree the child then clung to. All that she observed that following day was of great wonder to her. The stranger had sat by the fire until the sun was high, its heat undisturbed from the previous night's storm. Once light was upon the dealings of the forest, the stranger vanished from her sight for a few minutes before returning to the fire with the body of a hare. He peeled the skin and fur from its flesh, and then cooked it over the fire, sending the aroma of meat into the nostrils of the child, who then became aware of her great hunger. Although Orcan warriors could last a fortnight without sustenance, she was weaker and frail, childish in the ways of her kind, having yet to partake of the malice and cruelty of her kinfolk. And yet such a path was before her, undeniable for her to walk. Thus the stranger came to her for many things, but presently he brought the smell of his cooking, and with it the child descended. He was hunched over the fire, grinning at her,
which was an odd thing to behold. His smile was wide, stretching from either side of his head, for his mouth was large and pointed, as if he had a beak of flesh. Neath his white hood, his skin was blue, but darkened by the shadows of the trees and discolored by the fire. She saw before her one glowing with the orange of flames, and he frightened her still. But for the gnawing in her stomach, she drew near and sat expectantly. The stranger was pleased by this and offered her the beast. She took it and ate like a critter would upon a sacred morsel after many days of hunger. "What is your name?" asked the stranger. His voice was soft and low. He had spoken to her in a language she knew not, and for such she only gazed at him a moment before returning to her meal. Laughing, the stranger spoke with words she had heard, the Orcan tongue. Harsher than many others, it took effort to speak it, and the stranger felt it difficult to speak tenderly with such speech. Nonetheless, he asked again, "What are you called?" The child shook her head while whispering, orkling. Her voice was timid and sweet. Silence prevailed for a great while after she spoke, for she returned to her eating, and the stranger thought deeply of the girl before him. He understood that her having no name was not due to her youth, as if it would come later, but it was a proof of the deep state of depravity her culture had sunk. The savage folk seemed beyond the hope of redemption. "You called?" asked the child, once finished with the hair. The question startled the stranger, and he smiled for her young speech. She was merely 4 feet in height, and looked even smaller when sitting. The stranger sighed. "You may call me Rue," he said. "Rue," she responded effortlessly. He knew it was a word her tongue could speak with ease. "I go back," said the child as she stood. "Hail, Rue!" Rue stood laughing. "Come to meet me again, will you?" The child looked up at the great being before her. "If hungry," she said with a smile, before darting into the brush and out of sight. Upon the sun setting, she at last returned to her camp. Despite her young age, she knew the forest well enough. She came into the clearing, which was filled with savage warriors and orkling, and found her tent. She had eaten her fill earlier from Rue's meal, but there awaited her what was left of a carcass nearby. She came to it and toyed with the flesh to see if anything of worth was upon the bones. It was the uncooked corpse of a beast, and only bones and tendons were upon it. She decided to rest with the satisfaction of her solitary meal, and entered her tent. The female that had birthed her was present, although she spoke nothing to the child upon her entering. The older female sat in the corner of the tent, running her red hand up and down the canvas, staring thoughtlessly at her own skin. The child lay upon the ground and watched as her elder engaged in motions that seemed to have no purpose. After a short while, the sound of conflict filled the clearing. 2 males were fighting. Such was nothing strange to the onlookers, nor to the child in her tent. While this might be something concerning for a normal person, these were no normal people. These were savages, beasts, and this little child was born into them. With that, filled with no concern or fright, the child fell asleep. Chapter 2. Dark Tidings. Rue began to breathe heavily once the child had left him. His first task was to find her, which had proved quite pleasant to him, for she was a beautiful child. Not beautiful upon the eyes, for she was red and hairless, but her speaking and her innocence were greatly adored by the stranger, for he loved the purity of children. Although she was born into depravity and held it within her, she was yet to participate in any of its sorrows, and that adorned her with a sweet purity. Rue's second task, however, was much less pleasant to him. His presence within the land was then known by only one, the Orcan child. But there was another whose role in the coming conflict was needed, the Lost One. Named such for his malice and twisting of good gifts, this being was not an Orcan, nor was he of any folk still living, except for himself. Thus, once the child had left him, Rue came to the Lost One's cave, which sat high in the hills of a stony country east of Crook. The cave was not the only place he dwelt, but it was one, and Rue knew him to be there, for he could feel his hatred. Coming unseen and unfelt, when Rue spoke, the mountain before him seemed to shake, as if his voice were an unwelcome yet long-awaited thing. "Hear now, ye of darkness," spoke Rue, his voice echoing through the stone valley in which he stood. "Thine allotted time is nigh. Do what you must." And with that, before the Lost One could slither from his cave and cast before Rue's feet assaults and curses, Rue fled from the land in a white cloud coming up from the ground, so that when the yellow eyes peered from the darkness in the cave, only a white fog could be seen drifting upward from the ground and into the sky with the haste of lightning. Returning to the clearing in the dark forest, Rue appeared and fell to his knees before the fire he had made, which was then embers and smoke. He wept bitterly for all that he felt and all that his words meant. Having slumbered, when he awoke, the sun was coming up again, and before him sat the Orcan child. Seeing her, returned happiness to him, and he looked upon the fire, which was low and near dead. "Awaken," he said, and it burned again. The sudden outburst of flame startled the child, and she fell backward, lying on the twigged ground. Upon realizing what had happened, that fire came from the very mouth of the stranger. She laughed an innocent and childish laugh. Rue loved to see such a strange thing come forth from an Orcan, for they were too harsh a kind for such jubilance, even laughter. It caused him to laugh also, forgetting the pains of the day's eve. The child grew as the years passed solemnly in the kingdom of chaos. She came, as often as she ought, to Rue's clearing, which had become a pleasant dwelling for him, and a peaceful escape for her. The two had fashioned a hut for him, built in the trees. The child would scale the trunk and come to his door, spending the preceding day with him in conversation and play. Although some foreign thing had drawn her to the edge of the forest that fateful day, when her helplessness had overtaken her, presently her own desire for Rue's fellowship drew her often. The war outside the forest continued to rage as the tetrarchs toiled for regions and loyalty of the inhabitants of Kruk. But more fierce was the war waged within the forest. This was the battle that had come upon the savages many years prior. But then, nearing 8 years since the stranger's arrival, it had come to a heavy culmination where the fate of the folk themselves was to be determined. The battle was not that of axe and sword, nor kingship and loyalty. It was the decision to forever seal the fate of the savage kingdom in their depravity, or to cling to the hope of a better way. And yet the king of the savages, the Orcan sect that dwelt in the dark forest, had decided upon the hideous option. To him had been given a foul gift of healing. It was the ability to heal most wounds gained in battle. All Orcan could heal wounds naturally, faster than any other kind, for they're designed to be a kind for warring. However, the healing which was given unto the savage king was drastic in its potency. Such dark tidings were granted him by a stranger, an evil and malicious stranger from a distant land and a distant time. But he will be discussed later in this tale. Yet the cost of such a power was sanity. The savage warriors were nearly invincible in battle, but utterly crazed. And thus, a society already cruel and harsh, made void of reason or loyalty, would collapse into chaos. Knowing this, the king had formerly kept most from it, including himself. But slowly, as the 4 fractures of the kingdom grew, including his own, he shared the gift. And with his sharing, the savage kingdom could be poisoned with the insanity that ensued such a gift. Know that every good and perfect thing can be twisted by evil. Clearing by clearing, depending on the closeness to an upcoming battle, the king had begun distributing freely the strange gift, which is better called a curse, granting near invincibility to its consumers. Years prior, the king had come to the child's home clearing, and her own family had accepted the curse. This led them to debased thinking, and the child remained unnamed because of it. Another of the tetrarchs, the 4 kings that ruled in the land of Kruk, had assaulted the woods in hopes to gain a foothold for future warring. Having poorly set up his kingdom for replenishment of armor and weaponry, the savage king gave forth the maddening dark tiding. This was not some strange or dark sorcery. It was one's heart to the false dominion of the devil. This was not true healing, for the Orcan's mind was being killed day by day. Fittingly, when healing, one's vision would fade into a trance of red, so that the Orcan was guided by impulse. Whatever came upon them, which was the darkest kind of dark, had a mind of its own, and the warriors themselves knew not of what occurred, and often awoke confused. In defending the child's clearing in the dark forest, the savages won the battle, newly equipped with the lost one's dark gift. But the grueling victory had come at a cost of the child's parents. Even though the dark gift was healing, vicious and savage battle could still claim the lives of almost anyone. While no Orcan from the opposing kingdom survived that specific battle, the savages' wild tactics turned to rumor, which spread like whispers through the other 3 Orcan kingdoms. However, the child had the retreat of Rue's camp, and she was thus saved from the battle that besieged her home that dreaded night. Presently, alone and without kin, save for Rue, the child was now 10 years old, and was still sanctified in her innocence. But it was her being such an age, and still being innocent, that brought trouble to her. The Orcan culture is one of war, and death is part of such. It is difficult to comprehend, but most have taken a life by the age of 10, and if not, one sought to do so. The Orcan are depraved, and such depravity could only be kept from Orclings for a few years. Being separated from the other Orcan kingdoms did not keep such a cultural rite from permeating the savage society. Thus, when others saw the age of the child, she would be requested to join the war effort soon, despite being a female. Again, this was a savage kingdom with savage ways. If proven capable of fighting, she would join the warriors in battle. If not, she would be slain in training or become the mate of an Orcan to rear Orkling. Although, if she had dwelt within one of the cities in Kruk, she could join cookhouses or tend to crops. However, the savage kingdom had continued their deepening in their horrid state over the previous decade, and no such practices remained. They did not farm or cook. They hunted and scavenged for food. The life, then, that lay before her was even more bleak than it had been when Rue had first come to her, for the savage people had slipped further into chaos and depravity due to the reddened eyes of madness. Her future was to fight, mate, or be slain. Another ill fate came to her when the king of the Orcan in the dark forest had tasked those left in her home clearing to continue spreading the lost one's gift of healing and insanity. The child's clearing was in the southern reaches of the forest, east of a great valley that plunged southwest. After the defensive battle wherein the child's parents lost their lives, another Orcan kingdom had begun to come upon the coasts of the southern forest, hoping to claim more territory in the land of Kruk. That kingdom was the strongest militant kingdom in the land, and indeed was the very kingdom that the savage king had originally usurped from. The sect of Orcan, which reigned from a large city in the west, was called the Proud Kingdom. They dwelt in and controlled the great valley also, and moving eastward along the coast of the forest, provided a great advantage in warring against the other kingdoms who dwelt in the eastern plains of Kruk. The savage king, however, thought ill of the Proud Kingdom's increasing presence in the forest, for the Proud remained seldom defeated. Their army was larger, their weapons sharper, their armor stronger, and their king was a large and ferocious Orcan. The savage king knew his only hope in evicting the Proud presence from the dark forest was to attack them with the savagery and invincibility their dark power granted them. And thus, on a dreaded yet fateful day, the king himself came upon the child's clearing. He was seeking to enlist the youth in the savage kingdom into his army, and to grant them the gift, the curse, of the lost one. The child was young, but old enough to fight and pledge loyalty to the king. Being creatures of war and monarchy, the Orcans' strongest emotion, for they felt few, was loyalty. Such loyalty dictated their every thought and action, and was given to whomever they deemed the strongest Orcan. In the 4 kingdoms that warred against one another in Kruk, the 4 kings were deemed the strongest. Under them were elders and commanders and captains who could also hold the loyalty of lesser Orcan. However, each rank stretches loyalty upward unto the throne itself. And in the depraved case of the savage kingdom, loyalty to the king also meant loyalty to the lost one, although none knew this to be the case. The savage king, his mind slowly eroding with madness, allowed a great arrogance to well up within him. He branded each of his subjects' arms with the sap of a foul tree that grew in the woods. The markings were a stain upon the skin, unremovable, and permanently identified all savages as the king's loyal followers. Even if a savage would leave his rule and submit themselves to another king, they would forever bear the markings on their arms, an unchangeable marking of their depraved past. Presently, with several Orcan males who were dressed only in cloth around the waist, the savage king stood himself in the middle of the clearing, having a flask of the sap. Gazing around at all those who stood attention, he spotted the sweet child, whom Rue had befriended. Seeing her bare arms, he pointed at her and grunted in summoning. 2 large Orcan came at her and seized her, throwing her before the feet of the king. This is a brutal scene, but these were brutal beasts. The terrible king instructed another to mark her arms with the permanent sap, branding her as his for the remainder of her life. Although most young females of any kind would weep for the brutality shown her and the pain she felt, the child did not. She lay on the forest floor, and her own heart thrilled at what had happened to her. Even though the scene was awful, she felt content. Being depraved herself, she trusted the wickedness within her, and her loyalty was cast upon the king for the show of strength over her. She was helpless against him, branded by him, and would be a glad servant of him from then on. She would be proud of and loyal to the savage king until she met another who was greater than he. Although she had met one greater, Rue, yet she did not know his power, and the depraved state in which she was born allowed her to gladly accept the dark tiding. Chapter 3. Whispers of Hope. After being branded, the savage king and his Orkin proceeded to do the same to the other Orkling in the child's home clearing. After that, they all surged south to find warriors from the proud kingdom who were spying out the forest and attacked them. Before she could join the hunt, however, Rue had beckoned for the child to come to him. So strong an urge came upon her that she rose from her stupor and ran until she came to him. He stood at the base of his tree, looking upon her with sorrow in his eyes. "How do you fare?" he asked. Upon hearing his words, she wept. The pride she felt for her king choosing her faded, and the graciousness she felt from Rue caused her to know the hideousness of what had happened to her. She fell to her knees and said a thing an Orkin would seldom ever say. "I am sorry, Rue," she continued her weeping. Rue came to her, kneeling in the dirt, and embraced her. The two stayed in each other's arms for a great deal of time, and Rue spoke to her mind, as if speaking aloud, but just to her, so that if one were watching the two, all that could be observed was a silent pair embracing. "Now you shall not know sorrow, nor shall you know shame, for these are the things of your way and your kind, but soon deliverance will be granted to you, and you shall see thyself made anew. For now weep not, for such tears will soon be turned to laughter." The words came upon the child and comforted her, although she understood little of them. Not for her poor understanding of language, for she was older then and fluent, but for the hope her depraved heart could not fathom. Still the words of life came upon her, soothing her as they ought, and her weeping ceased. Then evening stretched long as the sounds of battle and savagery filled the region of the dark forest. Most of the warriors from the proud kingdom that had come upon the forest were slain, and few fled the beastly fighting of the savages. However, such fleeing in the Orkin culture was prohibited, being against their nature. Thus, those who fled ran unto other kingdoms and lands, or, if they returned to the city from where they had come, they were slain in the streets by other militants. Failure was deemed unacceptable in the Orkin culture. Not a week later, the forces of the proud kingdom came again to the dark forest. That fateful day would be the last time in a long while the child and Rue would see each other. Sensing the approach of the proud kingdom, Rue rose early and came to the child's own clearing. Those dwelling there seemed accustomed to the dark effects and the red sight that the king's gift had caused. Rue gazed upon many as they slept, lying about the forest floor, mostly unclothed like animals from their days of warring. Yet their red skin was spotless, for their wounds healed just as soon as they were made. Coming into her tent, Rue sat next to the girl, who had been forgotten by the king and allowed to return and dwell in her clearing. "Rise, my sweet child," said the stranger, and she did, obedient to his whisper. "What if I told you the age was nearly finished?" he said unto her mind, speaking in such a way so no one else would hear. Lying back down on her mat and closing her eyes, the child replied in thought, "I would wonder what you meant. I would wonder what such an age was, or what its end might be." Rue stretched out his hand and placed his long blue fingers on her bald head, stroking her forehead with his thumb where small horns would eventually grow as she matured. "Well," he began, "what is now shall no longer be, and so stirs such that I have come to you, not now, but then, all those years ago, a blink to me, your life to you." Said the child aloud. "I cannot say I understand your strange speech, Rue." The stranger laughed one last time. He then began to speak things to her which, to her, were utter nonsense. She neither understood the words then, nor would she remember them later, for her juvenile mind could not comprehend his speech. He spoke long and quiet, sometimes in thought, other times aloud. He said things like he, and him, and granted, and wisdom, and redeemed, and chosen, and many more words and phrases and parables and things that she heard only as foolishness. And with each mysterious word spoken presently, a former word he had once told her within her memory vanished. As if confusion could not dwell with the knowledge of Rue, the grace of their time together faded from what the child's heart could grasp. Indeed, as the mist of the morning flees from the sunlight, so did the thoughts and memories of Rue flee slowly from the child's mind. Such was a thing the stranger had prepared for, and he wept for it. Alas, the sun was in the sky, and the camp stirred. At the silence that came upon her mind, the child opened her eyes, but behold, no friend in front of her. She missed him still, although she no longer knew of most of what he had said unto her and done for her. There remained the warm memory of his touch and his love, but it was merely a shadow of memory, soon darkened by the life that lay before her, a life without Rue. Suddenly a roar filled the forest, followed by dozens more. These were the roars of Orcan, deep and growling like beasts in thunder, the roars of Orcan in battle. And the sound of great stomps and shouts followed, and coming outside the tent, the child saw the swarm of warriors entering a fray that was brought on by an assault from the warriors of the proud kingdom. With great number and vigor, the proud army's commander surged into the forest, downing as many as he could. One of his captains came farther into the forest and saw the child busying about the wood, fleeing, her arms marked afresh with the black markings of his enemy. With hatred in his eyes and loyalty unto his own king, he wished to slay her, even a child. But unnatural speed came upon her feet, and she outran her foe, fleeing deep into the dark forest. Despite their advantages, the other savage warriors fled deeper as well, healing from their wounds but unable to defend their clearing. Alas, by nightfall, the whole of the savage kingdom had rallied further into the forest, and their proud pursuers returned to the coastal clearings where the woods met plains. The proud kingdom then took their axes to the trees and shortened the coastline. They built structures of wood in the following months, making well-suited buildings for defending their expanded territory. The king of the savages fumed and slew many of his defeated followers in his rage. Slowly and ferociously, the king in the dark forest determined to regain his wooded kingdom, even to capture the great valley and perhaps the plains surrounding. The child, raised mostly by the tender stranger, whom she no longer knew of, was spared from the depravity engaged in by the other savages. For the stranger's presence remained with her and guarded her and guided her, even throughout the horrors of an Orcan life, although she did not remember his touch. As another decade passed, she never felt the insanity of the lost one's gift. She never had her eyes redden with frenzy. She was not taken as a mate, nor did she take the life of anything. She went about the forest with her fellow Orcan, her innocence going unnoticed and untainted. This was the chief reason for the stranger's visitation, to protect her from the darkness that grew around her, even after his departure. Yet her loyalty to her kind and king increased, and she was in the darkness of the lost one. But she was spared from being of that darkness. She was of another thing, place, time, person. But she would not know for many, many days to come. Chapter 4. Failure is Unacceptable. The sound of metal armor, rattling from the cold winter's breeze, could be heard far from the scene of battle. Standing in an unbroken line, hundreds of Orcan gazed across the icy valley called Rock Valley. One Orcan, a male standing close to 12 feet tall, showed his blackened teeth as a deep growl rumbled from his throat. He let out a fearsome roar of challenge. His name was Full. The trees on the opposite side of Rock Valley began to sway, yet it was not from the cold breeze that had swept by. Full knew what the swaying meant. They were coming. The savages who dwelt amongst the trees were a far lesser kingdom than the one he represented. He was proud to be of the one true Orcan kingdom, the Proud Kingdom. This kingdom reigned over those who were loyal with a strong and fierce grasp. Their warriors were always clad in tough metal armor, wielding heavy axes, and could easily break any foe. And their king was stronger and mightier than any living Orcan. Bred for war and a seemingly perfect leader, King of the Proud, King Drac and his army were often undefeated in battle. This filled Full with the fire of pride. It burned fiercely in his chest. Long ago there were tales told of the Orcan having a literal fire ablaze within their body for their ferocity. He felt it in his eyes as he watched his enemy burst through the tree line. A far lesser Orcan kingdom they were, indeed. The savage kingdom survived in the dark forest north of the Rock Valley. With no laws, no honor, no armor, and no weapons, these savage warriors surged across Rock Valley toward the proud warriors. Full and his army had stood on the cusp of the Grand Valley for almost half a day. Their intent was to intrigue their foe into engaging them in battle on the rocks of the valley, rather than in the unknown and thick terrain of the forest beyond. Their goal had been achieved, and as Full confidently believed, their victory was soon to be as well. The tree line of the forest had been lost in prior years, and no warriors were recovered. The wood structures meant to house warriors and defend the southern reaches of the forest previously mentioned in this tale were destroyed in the following years. Full himself once fought in the dark forest. He was the commander who fought in the little savage girl's home clearing. That was a decade ago. Now the proud warriors were expelled from the forest and even the valley, which offered the defense of far sight and ambush against eastern kingdoms. Thus, the present battle was of great importance and would be fought valiantly. If the proud could regain Rock Valley and the southern regions of the dark forest again, they would be much better defended against the other two Orcan kingdoms that dwelt in the east. A roar left the commander once again. Full lifted his weapon toward his enemy, a large axe designed for all forms of destruction. He charged forward to engage in battle. His fellow proud warriors followed closely behind him. With rage, he leapt into the crowd of savages and fought skillfully. The two armies fought for quite some time, but contrary to expectation of skill, ability, and terrain, the savages overpowered the proud and won the battle. The savages' stored angst and ferocity came upon the battlefield to defend their captured valley and their way of life, and they took Rock Valley, of course, because of their ability to heal their wounds. It would be historically noted by the other tetrarchs that the proud were becoming lesser in prowess, and by having a foothold outside the dark forest, the savage threat increased. That battle was one of the few times the savage kingdom had, led by their king, King Hag, won an organized battle against another Orcan kingdom. It was also a devastating loss for the proud kingdom, who had failed to regain the dark forest and Rock Valley. Full barely survived the battle. Beaten and cut, he dragged himself to the edge of the valley and slipped through rock passageways to climb unseen to the top and onto the plain that stretched toward his city. He knew failure often meant execution of warriors, even for a commander like him, the second highest military rank below the king. He recovered what strength he could and made haste to the gates of his grand city to report to his king. He wished to confirm the rumors. The savages could heal unnaturally, and he had some sliver of hope this revelation would allow him to keep his life. By nightfall, Full had reached the king's throne room, and whispers of his return had reached the elders of the proud kingdom. The great King Drac sat on his throne, carved from a single stone and decorated with various weapons. The throne from top to bottom ranged 15 feet tall. Down the long, dark steps from this great throne knelt the commander of the proud army, Full. He knelt on a wide patch of stone, serving as a walkway from the entrance to the throne. The walkway was in between two chasms that led down to a dark pit. The throne room was a grand, circular hall, and the king's throne sat in the middle like an island, while the elders of the proud kingdom sat on balconies, each lit by a fire, signifying that elder's presence. Forming a perimeter around the room, there were 2 guards at the base of the throne, and 2 at the entrance. With his head bowed, sweat mixed with blood dripping from his forehead, Full told his king something no Orcan in his kingdom had ever reported. "Madness!" the king exclaimed in the Orcan language, his red skin burning with rage. "You were defeated?" He stood, the tips of his sharp horns almost reaching the top of the throne. Failure is unacceptable. The king descended the steps of his throne and took Full by the collar of his breastplate. He hoisted the commander in the air as if he were a young dog. The Orcan in the room, the elders and the guards, and Full remembered well why Drac was the most feared Orcan in their kingdom. How, the king began again in his deep, thundering voice, did you, my greatest warrior, the only one I could ever see succeeding me as chief, fail? He gazed into the eyes of his loyal commander with burning rage and desperate confusion. My great king, Full began in reply, holding tightly to the king's hand so he could breathe. They were unlike any foe I have faced. The king released his grip, causing Full to fall 3 feet to the ground. He steadied himself and stood before his king. How? The king asked, turning away from his warrior. What made those forest dwellers different? My great king, as you know, in the past we have crushed the savages swiftly and with very little loss. They fight like pathetic orklings without armor or weapon. But as the whispers from a decade ago were that they could heal and could not be killed, so was the battle today. My great king, this time they had great strength. At first it seemed as though we had the advantage in the victory. I recall 10 Orcan I had brought to the ground in the first few seconds. Yet the savages rose from the ground, healed and fighting once more. King Drac paused for a moment. This report, the king rumbled, is disturbing. But it will not strike fear in the heart of your great king. He turned to Full again and seized him. Your failure, he screamed, is unacceptable. Curiously, the king pulled Full closer and whispered so no one else present could hear. He said, I am sorry, Full. The great King Drac threw his warrior into the chasm plunging from his throne room. Full fell for a few moments before his body disappeared into the darkness. Elders of the proud, the king stood tall with his arms raised. You have besieged me for many moons to rid the dark forest of the savage kingdom and to reclaim those woods as mine. He lowered his arms and paced slowly. As you have heard just now, my army was unable to defeat these forest-dwelling rats. Thus, I shall march to the woods in 3 nights. I shall fight the savage king. I will do what my army cannot. King Hag is a defective Orcan who has made for himself a rival kingdom which must now be punished. My great and powerful king, may your kingdom be everlasting, spoke an Orcan female seated on an elder's balcony. She was not an elder, but had invited herself to the balcony. Are you not leery of their newfound power? They shall surely hear the clanking armor from your warriors and strike you dead in the forest. The surrounding elders gasped and roared in disbelief. Such speech was not honoring. They turned to their king, expecting a death sentence for the blasphemous suggestion. The great King Drac fears nothing, the king shouted in response. I intend to travel into the dark forest alone. I do not need an army to defeat those Lar. Lar is a word in the Orcan language. The best way to translate it is nameless savage. It is a great insult to any Orcan. Dismissed! He roared as he smashed the doors to the throne room open with his fists. He exited the chamber, unaware it would be the last time he sat on his throne. Chapter 5. A Dangerous Mission. Cold filled the dark room in which Full lay. He was completely still in a shallow body of water, about 5 feet in depth. His head rested against the sharp rocky wall. His breaths were slow. He could feel a throbbing sensation run through his leg. A bone was likely broken. It had only been a few hours since his great King Drac threw him into the pit he lay in. Full presumed it was to his death. However, despite his severe pain, he was alive. A loud sound echoed through the bottom of the pit. It was as if a large door had been unlocked. Full stared at the wall as it slowly creaked open. The light cast from the other room nearly blinded the Orcan. He turned his head away and covered his eyes with his weak arms. He looked again as the light dimmed and saw a large silhouette breaking the casting light. It was clearly of an Orcan. The Orcan was tall and large. The horns on his head were nearly a foot long and stuck out in all directions upward. Full recognized him immediately. It was his king. Full struggled to stand. The water made it easier for him, as it bore some of his weight. He slammed his right fist against his chest and bowed his head. My great
His voice cracked as he attempted to speak. "My great king," he said, nearly choking. He felt a different kind of fire in his chest. It flared not from pride, but from agony. He felt as if a large critter was inside his lungs, attempting to tear its way out. He coughed loudly. "Rest, warrior," Drax said insistently. "I need you to be in the best of strength, for in 3 nights you and I shall march upon the dark forest and claim it as ours. Once we control its borders, the center of Kruk will be ours, and the other Orcan kingdoms will be easier to wage this war against. From there we may reclaim my entire kingdom with ease." He said this with confidence. "My great king," Foal began, the pain still flowing through him. "I deserve death. Do not grace me with this mission. Finish what you started above in the throne room," he said with his head bowed. Still. "No greater warrior has the proud kingdom than it has in you, Foal. You have ascended to the highest rank, defeated all your enemies, and fought bravely for your king. I will not allow one failure to end you." Foal began with confusion. "I do not understand, my great king. Earlier you declared my failure to be without excuse, and you sentenced me to death as I should be, for I have survived a lost battle. What will you gain from sparing my life and deceiving the elders of Proud?" Foal coughed violently again. "Reputation, my great commander," Drax said, turning around to face the open door behind him. "All Orcan must fear me, their king. If I spare the life of a warrior, even if you are the commander, that fear would diminish, and my rule would come to an end." "Well, then do not spare me," Foal yelled in reply. The action caused his lungs to cease, and he fell into the water. Drax stepped into the water and hoisted his warrior out of the pool. After a few moments, Foal coughed and spat water from his mouth. "Your wounds will heal," Drax said. "Stay here and rest. In 3 nights I will come for you again, and we shall march upon the forest. Take off this heavy armor. It will allow your muscles to heal with more haste." The king stood and walked out of the room, closing the large door behind him. Foal lay completely still in the shallow body of water. His head rested against the sharp rocky wall. His breaths were slow. The pain he felt was so great, it kept his mind off his dire confusion. The female Orcan, who was on the elder's balcony, and had spoken against the king's ability, walked slowly through the great Orcan city of the Proud. She stepped along the high walls surrounding the moonlit city. She journeyed through the barracks, inspecting hundreds of young Orcan males desperately training to serve their king in battle. Finally, she reached the Hall of Legends, a grand room ranging 100 feet in height, 600 in length, and 300 in width. The hall had massive pillars running all around it. Along the walls were statues of the great Orcan kings from the past, before the kingdom was divided into 4 factions, as it presently was. The female stopped walking. "This was the capital city for all Orcan in the whole land of Kruk," she began saying aloud, "a rallying point for all to look upon. And the great kings of old ruled a united kingdom, the greatest in the history of the world. And now, since the division, this city belongs to one Orcan kingdom, your kingdom, Drac." King Drac stepped out from the shadow of one of the pillars. "Your words should be watched," he said. "If I were another king, any other king, that would have meant the end of you earlier today," the king said in an irritated tone. The female sharply turned to face the king. She was much shorter than the king, and like all other Orcan was bald. However, unlike most mature Orcans, she lacked horns on her head, and her skin was a very pale red. "And you," she exclaimed, "your words should be watched as well," she yelled, her voice echoing through the hall. She calmed herself before speaking further. The king shifted his stance, slightly stooping his head. "Do you not remember who made you king?" she asked. "It was I." She lifted her head and turned back to the statue she looked at before. "My apologies," Drac said humbly. "I shall concede to your demand if you hear mine. Question not my rulings when the elders are in session. No other Orcan can speak down to the king or his decrees in front of the leaders of the Proud," he said in reply. "I agree. Your sovereignty is above my immediate opinion," she said. "You have my apologies, my great king. However, on the matter of my opinion, I do not see the sense in going to the forest dweller, Hag. He is a savage and has denounced you as his king, thinking of himself a worthy rival of your command. He has now created a kingdom for himself and refused to hear our demand to vacate the dark forest's coast. She turned back to face the king. Only a few days prior, she had suggested to Drac that he send forth word to the savages that their growing presence in the southern regions of the forest was not to be tolerated by the Proud. There had been no reply, and thus the Proud army set out to stand at Rock Valley and coerce the savages to fight. The Proud did not know of how deep the savages had developed into the dark forest, but they assumed, as the depths of the forest were so hostile, that their encampments were limited to the coastal regions of the forest. This, however, presented the Proud with the disadvantage of not being able to attack the other two kingdoms in Crook as easily. The dark forest lay in the central northern region, therefore it provided a military advantage to the kingdom that dominated it. The other three kingdoms thought correctly the savages were not using the advantage to its fullest potential, for they mostly stayed within the woods. All that transpired in Rock Valley, she began, is a tragedy to this great kingdom's reputation. Do not try and reason with Hag. He has brought dishonor to your army and to you. If you are to go, put an end to him swiftly in the night, she said in a demanding tone. Did you not hear me in the chamber? Drac began in reply. Did I not say I would fight him? Drac, she began, looking up at him. I know you, and I know you mean to speak with him and try to convince him to vacate the forest willingly. I assure you, Drac, he will not. He will end you without thought if given the chance. I dare not see this fate fall upon you. Drac, the great king, stepped forward, passing her. He stood before the statue, almost making eye contact with the stone figure. He was a large Orcan, clad in full iron armor, wielding a massive axe. I wish he were here to guide me, Drac said. No king of the Orcan has had his kingdom divided. There has always been one king and one order. Now in this sovereign land there are 4 Orcan kings. If he were here, he would grant me the wisdom to triumph over this time and unite the Orcan again. Drac, the female Orcan began. The time for a unified Crook is over. The time for a proud kingdom to destroy all its rivals has come. Too long have you waged careful warfare. Too long have you tolerated their disloyal presence. Crush the other 3 usurpers, who have sworn themselves your enemies, before they march against these walls and crush you. Perhaps other enemies will hear of your defeat and come against us. Imagine a world where the very power of the Orcan is looked down upon. Could you allow such a tragic end to the fearful reign of the Orcan? Could you allow any creature on earth to doubt the fear that has been instilled within them for countless ages? She asked, staring at the king's back. She looked beyond him to the statue. Your father is gone, and the only wisdom he would give you is this. Drac turned around and faced her. Fight, she said. Destroy and crush all those who oppose you. You have the power. She turned around and began to walk away. She stopped and turned her head back to the king. Do you understand what you have to do, Drac? Yes, the great and mighty King Drac replied. I understand, mother. Chapter 6. Within the Dark Forest. Night's thick darkness hovered over the land of Crook. A muscular stag stalked through the moonlit dark forest. Its long body slowly moved forward as it gazed upon its prey. A small animal with white fur crouched by a red plant, growing from the forest floor. It ate completely unaware of the stag's plan to kill it. The stag opened its mouth, revealing long fangs. It crouched on its hind legs, readying itself for the pounce. The kind of deer that lived in the dark forest are capable of running faster than any other forest-dwelling animal and can jump great distances. Just before the stag leapt for its prey, it was pounced upon by another fierce beast, an Orcan. That Orcan was around 11 feet tall, with 4 stubs of bone on his forehead. They were what remained of his horns, all broken during battles with other Orcan. His most recent battle had led him to an altercation with Full of the Proud Kingdom. However, this savage Orcan had a newly found strength, a gift of healing from his king. This allowed him to be victorious over Full. This seasoned warrior was loyal, as much as he was willing to be, to his king, Hag. He picked up the deer carcass and continued his journey through the woods,
About an hour later, still under the cover of night, he approached his encampment. Unlike the other Orcan kingdoms, the Savage Kingdom did not have a great city built of iron and stone. The savages lived simply in the forest, without structures or shelters. The Orclings were, more recently, never given names, and they were not bound by any laws, save for the following of the king. All Orcan, despite their desire to fight, were not selfish, and knew nothing of greed nor jealousy. This contributed to their being the perfect warrior. Their emotion was war. They lived for it and trained every day. That savage who fought full had fathered 18 Orclings in his time. The Orcan have no concept of love. The closest they can achieve is loyalty. An Orcling will remain loyal to its parents until another calls for it, a king or a captain. Once their loyalty is given to this new prospect, all ties to the ones who raised them are cut. Two Orcan, a mother and a father, have a sort of loyalty to each other more out of duty. It is not the type of marriage that most other kinds engage in. An Orcan's chief loyalty is to their king. The savage stepped into his camp, immediately being seized by other savage males. One, a massive Orcan with dark red skin, sat on a fallen tree gazing intently. The savages were known to fight each other without cause, due to the insanity the king's dark gift brought. This savage, however, turned his gaze away, hoping to avoid conflict. Not for the reason of fear, nor for the thought of failure. He carried news he wished to give to his king. A fight with one of his fellow savages would only slow down the delivery. Suddenly, his thoughts and reasoning for avoiding combat changed. He dropped the deer and charged toward the seated Orcan. His eyes turned red from madness, and the two fought. Even though the darker Orcan was larger, older, and stronger, when a savage was crazed by the king's gift, there was little that could subdue him. After a few moments of the battle, the larger Orcan realized this younger savage would not stop until he won the fight. So, with a shred of wisdom left in his own mind, the older Orcan scrambled out of the fight and ran off into the darkness of the forest. The younger savage, who had fought with Full in Rock Valley, shook his head, regaining his vision, and looked around. He was not sure what had happened. He saw the deer carcass he had just hunted, which he remembered doing. Then he saw 3 of his Orclings not far from him. He quickly grabbed the stag again and approached his young Orcling swiftly. He tossed the deer on the ground. "Eat," he grunted. The 3 Orclings pounced on the corpse and tore into it like beasts. The savage warrior walked away from them and made his way into the woods again. It was only a few minutes before he reached the king's encampment. It was a clearing in the dark forest with a large fire in the middle. Dozens of massive savage warriors filled the clearing. The savage passed through them all, being recognized as a close servant to the king. The savage approached the tent that was set up at the end of the clearing. "My king," the savage began, "2 Orcan from the city are approaching the forest. It is very likely they have already breached our borders. One I recognize as a warrior whom I fought a few days ago. The other bears the resemblance of the weak King Drac." Just as he finished speaking, the tent flap was lifted by a massive red arm, painted with dark sap, the substance used to create the markings all savages bore on their forearms. The savage warrior dropped down on one knee and bowed his head. A large Orcan stepped out from the tent and stood before the savage. "At last," King Hag, king of the savages, said with a grin. King Drac and Full walked silently among the dark trees. The snow through which they had previously walked tapered off as they found shelter among the thick boundary of trees. Full attempted to walk swiftly, limping as he went. A bone in his leg had broken when he plummeted to the bottom of the pit below his king's island throne. It caused him great pain, and he was unsure if the pain would ever cease. Full, unlike every day before, was not adorned with metal armor. He had only a few patches of leather armor covering his shoulders and chest, and the rest of his body was covered in a cloth tunic and trousers. This made him feel exposed. Taking the blow of a weapon seldom concerned him before. Now he would need to take caution when entering a battle. Fear was never something to take hold of an Orcan. However, older Orcan, developed through many years of experience and changes of their loyalty, a sense of caution. This allows elders to have an unbiased approach to the king's commands and offer sound advice, although never an objection. Full was at an age where wisdom and the sense of caution began to accompany the boldness that could lead him to sacrifice his life for his king, Drac being the second king he had been loyal to. Full at least held firmly to his axe. He had every intention of using it when the opportunity arose. His confusion about the king's behavior in letting him live was clouded by the thrill of facing the savages once again. "My wish is for all of us to depart without a fight," Drac whispered to Full, as if aware of his thoughts. "I am not afraid of either outcome, my king," Full replied in truth. The king laughed shortly, an uncommon thing for an Orcan to do. "I know you have not a drop of fear in your heart. I will give Hag one final opportunity to clear the southern reaches of the dark forest of his Orcan. I know he will hear me, but only if it was I who came into his presence. I have not seen him in many, many years." "My king," Full began in reply, "if I may offer my opinion, why give him the opportunity? Why not strike him down? He is a lesser king with a lesser kingdom." "I am bound to Hag in a way I cannot expect you to understand," the king said, walking ahead of Full. The confusion flooded Full's mind once again. He quickly dismissed it in order to maintain his focus. The two Orcan walked through the forest for not even a quarter of an hour before reaching the savage camp. Most of the savages lived on the outskirts of the forest, being ready for battle at any moment. However, there were a few tribes that dwelt deep within the woods. Many of them had not been seen for ages. Drac and Full came upon a large clearing, one of many wherein the majority of the savage army dwelt. As soon as the two proud Orcan entered the firelit clearing, dozens of savages stood. They knew who that was, the great king of the proud kingdom. With this knowledge, all the savages remained dormant as the two proud walked through the camp. The savage child who had been born without a name, found by a stranger in the snow and grew up amongst the savages, but was protected from partaking fully of their depravity, stood only a few feet from Full and King Drac. Although she was no longer a child, 10 years had passed since Rue left her and erased the memory of him from her mind. She was now a young Orcan woman. "You," Drac shouted while pointing at her. "Take me to your commander, Hag," he said fiercely. She nodded, keeping her head bowed. She was no more than 8 feet tall. She had small shoulders and wore a loose wool dress. She walked in front of the two proud Orcan as she led them through clearings and patches of trees. "By the way," she said, still walking forward, "Hag is not my commander. He is my king." Full looked at Drac with surprise. His king simply grinned and kept moving forward. Finally, they approached a clearing with a large fire burning in the center. There was only one savage in the clearing. A large male stood by the fire, gazing down at the flames. He wore nothing but a loincloth wrapped around his waist. He had no weapons around him and looked absolutely defenseless. Full knew this was not the truth. He knew that savage needed only his red hands and strong arms to fight successfully, as he had recently witnessed. "Welcome," Hag began in a deep and raspy voice, turning to face his visitors, "to my kingdom." The large Orcan spread his arms out boastfully. Chapter 7. Battle in the Dark Forest. Full's muscles flexed as he gripped his axe. He stared at his foe, the king of the army whom he failed to defeat in Rock Valley. King Hag was alone and could easily be attacked. Full felt the fire in his chest blaze and roar as it grew, encouraging him to end his foe. Full, despite his nature, stood still. For there was one thing greater than his desire to fight that Orcan: his loyalty to his great king. King Drac stood looking at Hag. Conflict filled him as he spoke. "My army is the greatest army this land has seen in many ages. How did you, a forest-dwelling Lar, defeat me?" King Hag laughed hysterically. The greatest army, he began loudly. What defines greatness? Weapons? Armor? Numbers? He questioned. What about immortality? I would say an army that cannot die would be known as the greatest army. Ask your failure of a commander why he could not defeat me, the king in the dark forest boasted. Full shifted his stance, being filled with dishonor and confusion as he heard those words again. I know of what happened, Drac began, but I know not of how. That is the primary reason for my coming, he said, taking a few steps in front of Full and the young female, as well as to determine if peace can be made between our two kingdoms. Hag closed his eyes slowly and his body hunched over, revealing a jagged spine. A low growl surged from behind his black teeth. He opened his eyes and looked at the other Orcan. His eyes were red instead of the usual black. He crouched down and growled even louder. A few moments passed this way. Then, having composed himself, Hag stood up straight, seeming to be well, and opened his eyes. They were the usual black again. He turned to face the fire again. You mad, he said. I'd not tell you. Drac, confused by his mannerisms, approached the troubled king. What has happened to you in this forest? He asked. Is that why you want us to leave? Hag blurted in reply as he turned to face Drac. You want... We have, he yelled. You not take dark forest. He screamed, his eyes becoming red again. You not take gift. You not be his king. Brother, Drac yelled over the savage king's babbling, his voice thundering through the trees. Full grunted in surprise. He stared at his king in disbelief, replaying the word in his head. Brother. Brothers? The proud king and the savage king were brothers? What has driven you to this state? Why are you frenzied so? Drac yelled, gazing intently at his deranged brother. I not brother, Hag yelled in reply. I king of dark forest. Hag charged at Drac, his eyes entirely the color of red. Foam spewed from his mouth as he leapt toward his brother. Despite the insane savage that came at him, Drac remained the stronger, even without Hag's dark power. Drac caught the charging savage by the shoulders, meeting him head-on in the clearing. He twisted his own frame and tripped his brother's legs. Drac then pinned Hag to the ground and rested his weight and strength on Hag's body. Enough, brother! Drac yelled. The great king moved so quickly that Full did not even have the time to react. Hag slowly calmed down. His breathing lessened and his muscles eased. The red film over his eyes disappeared once again. Hag, Drac began, what illness has overtaken you? The lost one, Hag said, catching his breath. He allows us to heal. He grants us everlasting life. I thought it was a free gift at first, but it costs us our soul. The longer we take it, the farther we go from ourselves. Hag closed his eyes, breathing heavily through the foam still in his mouth. I rage, I heal, and slowly I cannot remember my days. Drac released the strong grasp he held on his brother and walked toward the fire. Hag stood up, his back bent again, and he unwillingly determined to attack his brother again. Full saw this. He stepped forward and took hold of Hag, and with the struggle, the years of insanity caught up with Hag, and his mind vanished entirely. Full looked into the red eyes as if gazing into fire. He roared a roar like the fiercest of lions, not knowing what else to do. Hag wriggled out of Full's grasp and fled, shrieking like an ape. He disappeared into the night, leaving Drac, Full, and the young female savage forever behind him. The young Orcan female stood back some 10 feet from the scene. Her body trembled. She knew little of the world, and that which she knew, she forgot, and that which she remembered was depraved. Yet in one moment, most of what she did comprehend changed. Her king, the one whom she was loyal to, was gone. Loyalty is not something the Orcan are trained or raised into. It is something that lies deep within them. This young female had never killed before, nor had she ever felt rage. Her lack of experience with and protection from war, and vengeance caused her to look not on Full with hatred, but rather with admiration. He had put to flight the strongest figure in her life, and he had her loyalty then. Full stood, gazing at Drac as thoughts flooded his rage-filled mind. Orkin abandoned the sense of loyalty to family when becoming loyal to a new commander. No Orkin could have felt the way the king felt. The king showed loyalty to his own brother. That was un-Orkin-like. Unless the king, being subject to no one, could retain loyalty to his family. But perhaps this King Drac has compromised what gives the Orkin race strength. Perhaps this king is not fit for his kingship, nor the loyalty of any Orkin. Such were the thoughts that filled the former proud commander's troubled mind. "My great king," Full began, "you should strike me where I stand, for my thoughts betray you." "Of what do you speak?" the king replied, staring at the trees behind which his brother had disappeared. "No Orkin has ever spared the life of an attacker. No Orkin king has spared the life of a commander who has failed in battle, and yet you have done both." The king turned away. "Full," he began slowly, "I felt something I cannot explain. I felt a sense of loyalty to Hag. Therefore I could not slay him when he ran at me. I could not slay you when you failed me," the king said quietly. Full began to breathe heavily. His stomach churned, and he started to allow his anger to take hold of him. Full stopped himself. "My king," he said, as he witnessed the greatness of Drac fade from his mind. "I cannot return to Proud City with you," he said. "I do not understand what madness has driven the Orkin way from you, and for that I cannot submit to your rule." Full said this with great remorse. He could feel the fire in his chest weaken. He felt cold, as if he stood before his once respected king. "I had plans to restore you, Full," replied the king. "I would give you a new name, and you could ascend to the rank of commander once again. It is not the dishonor of my loss that has driven me to desert you. It is my lack of faith in you as my king, my lack of faith in you as an Orkin." Full closed his eyes, knelt, and presented his neck to King Drac. "If you have but a spark of the same fire I once felt in my chest, do me this last honor," Full said loudly. The young Orkin female gasped at the sight. She realized Full's submission to Drac, and she watched as it drifted away in that cold forest. "I will not take your life," Drac said in protest. "It is to my dishonor that I have lost your faith. I am lost in my soul. I feel things no Orkin has felt. I've done things no Orkin has done. I wish you well on your journeys. Travel east to the City of Refuge. You'll find a place there. Perhaps King Gon will be worthy enough of a king for your loyalty. And if not with him, go to your former commander, Dal, although he is said to have left our lands long ago." Full felt utterly cold in that moment. "Leave, my old friend," Drac said. "Take the female with you, for no Orkin within the dark forest will survive tonight." In the Orkin culture, if an Orkin doubted his king's power, he had the right to challenge the king in a duel, and if the people of the kingdom thought the challenger was worthy, they would approve of the outcome. Whichever Orkin was victorious would be the new king. Yet, Full stayed his weapon. He knew his duty and right. He, however, did not perform it. Full stood and turned around to leave the dark forest. He saw the young female standing in front of him, her head bowed. "Come with me," he said shortly. The two of them stepped into the tree line and walked into the darkness towards the snowy plains just south of them. Drac stood by the fire alone. "The lost one," he heard his brother's voice resound in his mind. Drac wondered how he could find such a being, how he could gain Hag's power. Hag had lost his mind, but Drac did not like his thoughts. Perhaps the match was fit. While the lost one does not make an appearance until later in this tale, he at least knew of the dealings that night, He knew of the battle in the dark forest, and he knew he had lost his Orcan king. And so, in a way that cannot be explained now, he granted Drac his thoughts' requests. He bestowed on him the dark tiding he had once given to Hag. Almost immediately, Drac felt the effects. The conflict within him disappeared. He felt as if his bones had become denser, his muscles stronger. He clenched his fist and grinned as he opened his eyes. The pain he felt from the loss of his brother and friend was gone, and all of his thoughts, foreign to the Orcan, vanished. All he saw was red. And as Foal and the young female were leaving the forest, having crept past camps and scouts, they could hear the sounds of battle behind them. Someone or something with great power was fighting the savages within the forest. And that night, King Drac massacred the savages. Chapter 8. A Strong King. The throne room was dimly lit by fires burning on 4 of 9 different balconies. Only a few members of the Council of Elders were present. Overlooking the island of rock on which the throne sat, the elders studied maps as they kept track of the territories their kingdom controlled. Unfortunately, the range of the Proud Kingdom had been decreasing. The loss of the most recent battle in Rock Valley caused them to lose an influential portion of the middle of the land of Crook. It was proven by time and record that the Orcan kingdom that ruled the 3 central regions of Crook, Rock Valley, the Dark Forest, and the hills of Crom, was able to confidently declare Crook as theirs. Being able to ambush from the Dark Forest at any time, having the high ground and cover of the hills of Crom, and using Rock Valley as a strong divider for attacks on Proud City made for easy victories in battle. The elders sighed as they grieved losing a place in the center of Crook, as it most likely meant they would not be able to foresee an attack from a rival kingdom and may lose their great city to those they hated. However, their grievance vanished quickly. Word of the king's return was sweeping through the streets of Proud City. Soon after, all the fires on the balconies were lit, and all the elders present. King Drac's mother slowly crept her way onto one of the balconies. "Joel," an Orcan elder whispered to her, "I had not expected to see you. I presumed you had fled the realm in order to avoid the wrath of the king." The elder was close to 900 years old. He had served as an advisor to Drac's uncle when he had previously been king. At this time, he served his king by managing the city and the Proud alongside the other elders. Joel, Drac's mother, remained silent, her eyes fixed upon the large doors, anxiously waiting for them to burst open. She feared her son might not enter through those doors. She also feared he would. Moments later, the doors slowly opened. It was nearly dawn, and the black sky was beginning to brighten. Snow flew its way into the throne room as the doors remained open. A tall shadow appeared on the stone walkway that led to the throne. It was cast from fires behind him, and the shadow clearly belonged to King Drac. He entered through the doorway and into the throne room. The elders quickly scanned his body, being filled with wonder as they noticed he was covered in the obvious signs of battle. The cloth on his body was torn. There was ice on his horns, and dirt spread all across his frame. He had something in his left hand, which he held close to his hip. He stiffened his neck and raised his head to look at each elder as he stretched out his arm to present the object. The elders gasped once they realized what he had returned with. Cole opened his hand and a canvas sheet fell to the ground, filled with horns. Savage horns. Something then occurred which had not happened in a very long time. The elders stood on their feet and applauded their king. Drac was taken aback by this response when he entered that room. His intense stance was brought on by a whirlwind of emotions raging inside him. He was new to the dark gift that had plagued his brother Hag. Therefore, its maddening effects were not as strong upon his mind. This had meant insanity for Hag. But for a mind like King Drac's, already deeply troubled with strange emotions and affections for his family, the gift meant clarity. But when his enraged trance ended after massacring the savages, his old mind returned. Thus, guilt, pity, grievance, and shame were among the emotions he felt. All emotions an Orcan would not normally feel. Anger, pride, and courage were among the wrestling emotions an Orcan would feel, and the conflicting emotions beat strongly inside Drac's chest. But the more he listened to the applauding elders around him, the warring emotions faded from his mind. After a few moments, only pride remained, an accumulating amount of it, as the elders continued to clap their old red hands together for him. Joel looked around her, perplexed by the scene. She was some 600 years old, and had never, not once, witnessed such an expression of applause. Many of the elders, however, had. Some 800, some 900 of age. The elders had gained their titles not from their status amongst the Orcan, but rather from their age. An Orcan living beyond 300 years of age was unusual. Achieving 900 was all the more rare. The elders stood in unison, giving that rare expression of praise. This was brought on by pride for their king, and that emotion brought forth the memory of that expression. They gave it to their king, Drac. They too, as the king had, felt pride. They were proud, not of their king, but to be under the king's great rule. They were all the more the proud kingdom. "Hail the mighty King Drac!" one of the elders shouted. "The greatest living Orcan king!" Another cheered. "May his kingdom be everlasting!" Yet another elder exclaimed. "Defeater of his enemies and slayer of the weak," the elder whom Joel had sat with said. His speech brought silence to the room as all longed to hear what he, a highly revered Orcan, had to say. "You have yet again proven your kingship over us. You have protected our borders and increased our lands. You have our loyalty." The elders began applauding again. "You have our axes," he yelled as the applause filled the room. "You have our lives." The revered elder yelled in finality and let out a roar. Drac stood still, recalling his slaughter in the dark forest. He was attacked more than he could have ever imagined. And yet, he sustained no injuries. He recalled what Hag had told him about the dark tiding. The previous night had proven its validity. Whatever it was and however he got it, it granted incredible strength and the ability to heal. And for Drac, it also allowed him to have his mind cleared of all his troubles and emotional wrestling. He was an Orcan, driven by rage and ready to defeat his enemies with nothing to stop him. "This is my victory," the king shouted boastfully, silencing the applauding elders. "I alone brought the savages to their knees and ended their pitiful kingdom. Too long have we been carefully waging our wars against our foe." He slowly paced along the walkway, glaring at each elder as he spoke, never stepping onto the throne. "Considering borders, consulting maps, taking censuses of our troops. Vanity!" he yelled so loud the flames on the balconies flickered. His voice rang throughout the room and down the dark pit below the throne. "We are the strongest kingdom in all of Kruk. I am the strongest king in these lands. I am declaring a state of total war against all surrounding nations, not just the defective Orcan, the stone people also. Let us attack the Giram first. It has been too long since they suffered at the hands of the Orcan." The Giram are a species that dwelt in the mountains north of Kruk. Their country has no name, and they were often called Stone People. "Elder Kag," the king turned toward a balcony. On it was the highly revered elder who had just previously addressed Drac's victory. Your age has not determined your ferocity in battle. I will see that power unleashed. March north and begin an assault on the Giram's border immediately. We will storm their mountainous stronghold and destroy those who have opposed the Orcan rule and shared our lands for far too many years. Yes, my great king, Cag replied. You are dismissed, Cag, the king stated loudly. I will convene with you in the war hall shortly. Cag turned around and exited the balcony immediately. Joel remained on the balcony, her gaze fixed on the king. Drac looked at her shortly. He knew of her disapproval. However, that time he did not care for it. The rest of you, he said, resuming his pace and addressed to the remaining 8 elders. Send word to all those loyal to King Drac. Their time to fight for their king has come. My great king, another elder began. Do you mean to involve Orcan who are not members of the proud army in this battle? The king met the sight of the elder. He grinned as he began. Every Orcan capable of wielding an axe will fight. Farmers and cooks. Females and Orclings too. You elders have sat here all these 200 years, plotting and planning on how to preserve the kingdom's way, whilst those who have sworn themselves our enemies have been allowed to establish themselves. I am doing what I should have done long ago when I first became king. I will personally end the false kings of this land, starting with the Giram. The king felt a hot flame burn in his chest as he spoke. In fact, he began again, this council has done nothing to bring us forward in this time of war. You have acted as if we are not at war. I hereby disband this council until all those who live in our lands and are not subject to my rule are dead. The king roared in triumph and finality. The elders gasped in disbelief. The proud kingdom, even before Drac had become its king, had never known a time without the council of elders. Go, the king yelled, reclaim our lands and make known to all the proud that we are at war. Drac marched toward the doors and shoved them open. He walked tall into the icy winds that blew about. The doors did not shut, and the snow poured into the walkway. The wind rushed in, and the fires on the elders' balconies, lighting the grand room, went out. Chapter 9. Within the Hills of Crom. It was an early morning on one of the final days in winter, the season referred to by the Orcan as the season of ice. Every tree was whitened with frost, and the leaves on the ground were a colorless gray, stung by the cold night they previously endured. Snow heaped up against every boulder, and the hills of Crom were laden with layers of white. Beyond the icy clouds shone a grand sun, its heat barely giving warmth to the Orcan female that traveling with Full. She shivered violently and slowly walked behind her leader. Full felt the cold as well. Under normal circumstances, the stinging chill of the wind would offer him no discomfort. That prideful fire within his chest had always kept him ablaze with courage. However, since his loyalty was shattered in the dark forest, that flame had diminished, and the cold had made itself known to him. The 2 Orcan had been walking eastward since they left the forest. Full's limp, caused by the fall that he presumed would kill him, seemed to have faded. He was evenly distributing his weight amongst both legs and no longer felt the pain in each step. If Full had thought of it, he would speculate the lack of pain was from his leg being partly frozen due to the severe cold during their walk at night. Since the beginning of their trek, they had not spoken a word to one another. Suddenly, the Orcan female stumbled to her knees, gasping for air. Hunger, she mumbled with a small, weak voice. Full turned around and looked at the female. She was small to him and had very little muscle. Full guessed her age to be near 20 years, merely nothing compared to his 300. He scanned the immediate area for a place to rest. He saw a large gray tree standing atop a small hill. A small series of large rocks formed a mound at the foot of the hill. The tree swayed in the direction of the pile of rocks. proving to full the rocks would give shelter from the wind. "This way," he said shortly. He began walking toward the tree. However, he did not hear the sound of the young female's feet pressing into the snow behind him. He turned his head and noticed she was kneeling, still in the snow, shivering. Her small red hands tightly clasped her shoulders. He noticed the black markings that she bore, putting a distasteful feeling in his mind as he recalled her origins. She had grown up in the forest, where there was always a fire nearby to offer warmth, and unlike Full once had, she had not the passionate flame inside her chest to offer her any sense of warmth. Full stepped toward her and knelt on one knee beside her, his massive frame encompassing her as he hoisted her from the snow-laden ground with his arms. He carried her to a pile of rocks and placed her on one of the large boulders. He knew that all the lumber he could possibly find near them would be frozen and beyond the ability to burn. He climbed the rocks and reached the top of the hill. The tree stood next to him, 5 times his size. He took hold of his branches and pulled himself up. He climbed the tree trunk in an attempt to gauge the landscape ahead. Beyond a vast number of hills, the snow seemed to taper off. He could see a settlement of some sort, too. Tents and fires littered across a grassy plain. And in the far distance, far enough he could barely see the form of it, lay his supposed destination, the City of Refuge. Refuge City was certainly not as grand as Proud City. It seemed to Full, although the distance could not give him assurance, to be less than a third of the size. He grunted. He was still filled with regret from the dark forest, and he knew not of what he would gain from joining that lesser kingdom. He simply knew not of how to proceed. For most of his life, his loyalty was pledged to Drac, and before him it was Dal, one of the Orcan kings in Kruk, before he had left Drac's reign. One of the Orcan commanders in Kruk, before he had left Drac's reign. Dal was Drac's kin, and the former commander of the Proud Army. Presently, Full thought perhaps Dal was better to go to, for he knew him well and better than Gon, for he was not as close to Gon as he had been Dal, before the great schism that divided Kruk into 4 kingdoms. But Full had not departed with him, and Dal all those years ago. Drac's kingship, not Dal's new kingship. He had chosen to stay under Drac's kingship, not Dal's new kingship. Full knew not of any bitterness held toward him for not choosing to follow Dal unto his new kingdom. Perhaps death would await him, or a kind of shame an Orcan could not fathom nor describe. Thus, presently, in those icy hills, his loyalty lay with no Orcan. He felt lost and purposeless, an uncertainty that could not be cured. He looked down at the base of the hill he was on and saw the young Orcan female sitting on the rock. She seemed to be in a better state than previous moments. He realized his new task, a momentary one, close enough to act upon and forget the larger concerns of his life. Feeding the female. Orcan males have a tendency to provide protection and sustenance for their females and Orclings. This tendency is common present in Orcan males who have married. Full, however, had not. He had served in the Proud Army relentlessly for the majority of his years in maturity. Full was like most other Orcan, loyal, brutal, and true to his nature, even if not required of him. "We're only an hour's a walk from a settlement," Full spouted down to his follower below. "You will find food and a fire there." He jumped off the tree, past the pile of rocks, and landed on the ground at the foot of the hill. His landing instantly reminded him of the brokenness within his leg. He could feel all the healing his body had done shatter. He winced and grinned his teeth, clamping his jaw tightly as he attempted to mask the pain. "Have you a name?" he asked, attempting to distract himself from his pain and her from the intense hunger and cold she felt. She looked at him, puzzled, shivering as she sat. "Name," Full began. "What is your name?" The Orcan female simply shook her bald head and kept staring at him in silence. "My name is Full," he said slowly. Flustered and confused, he gestured toward himself and then pointed at her. "What is your name?" He asked again, hoping the signing would help. No, she said, shaking her head. No? No name? Full asked, soon recalling the savage kingdom from whence she came. Lar. I will call you Lar, then. Full stepped toward her, grabbed her arm, and brought her to her feet. He started walking in the direction of the settlement he saw. Lar was not following him. She had barely the strength to stand, and no way to communicate with him. All she had was her desire to follow him. Full grabbed her by the waist and slung her over his shoulder. He marched on, limping with each step, knowing once she was fed, he could leave her behind. The icy winds that swept through the center of Kruk calmed in severity, as Full, carrying Lar on his shoulders and struggling to balance his own weight due to his injury, made his way through the hills of Crom. The hills were named after a legendary Orcan, Crom. Like most of southern Kruk, the region was once flat, except for a few slopes and minor inclines. In his youth, some 800 years ago, Crom led a rebellion against Hal, a mighty Orcan and the first of the kingly line Drac descended from. Crom rivaled Hal in strength and vigor. Hal ruled a united Kruk. Unlike the present time, almost all Orcan were loyal to Hal as their king, and he ruled a prosperous kingdom from Proud City, although it was known by another name at the time. Crom attempted to challenge Hal's kingship and called for a kingly duel in the arena at the center of the war hall. That challenge caused outrage amongst all Orcan in the city. Crom was attacked and chased out of the city before he could even fight for the throne. However, despite his exile, Crom's desire to overthrow Hal's reign did not stop. He traveled southeast and found that after Rock Valley there was a vast plain. This is where Crom decided to build. He gathered outcasts, rebels, and mercenaries, those who were not loyal to Hal, from throughout the land of Kruk. He piled hundreds of heaps of large stones in the plain. However, he piled these rocks to form structures, buildings he and his Orcan could dwell in, yet the structures looked simply like mounds of boulders. Crom sent spies into Proud City, who told tales of Crom building for himself a fine city, one that rivaled the glory of Proud City. This rumor spread its way into the throne room and into the ears of King Hal. The news infuriated him. Hal intended to disrupt the building of that rebellious city by destroying Crom and his followers. Hal assembled a great army of his loyal warriors. His Orcan count was close to 34,000, whereas Crom merely had an army of 2,000. However, Hal marched to the plain in hopes of crushing his opponent and was himself defeated. Once Hal's troops were deep within the hills, Crom and his forces attacked. The surprise was great, and each of Crom's Orcan had overcome 5 of Hal's troops before the Proud were able to retaliate. And the battle went on for 2 days. Crom's Orcan scurried their way through the hills, entering and exiting at opportune moments, giving them the advantage to move through the battlefield at little risk to themselves. The Proud forces dwindled slowly, but they dwindled nonetheless. The Proud knew not of how many of Crom's Orcan there were at the beginning of the battle nor at the end of it. When the last enemy fell, only 4, aside from Crom himself, remained. Hal did not die in the battle, but was severely wounded and thought to have died. Due to the vast number of Orcan, Crom never faced Hal in the battle, and he believed him to be dead. The final casualties of the battle were 24,000 Proud fallen and 10,000 wounded. Most of the 10,000 eventually found their way back to Proud City, while some succumbed to their wounds over the course of a few days. Hal found his way back to the city too, and never ventured out to attack Crom again. The news of the battle in the hills of Crom spread throughout Kruk, and Crom became a revered and feared Orcan. Tales were told that Crom commanded an army of 100,000 elite Orcan, and that was how he defeated the Proud army. He became a legend, and Orclings would often include him in their warplay about the streets of Proud City. Crom lived in the hills for many decades after the battle. He intentionally did not accumulate another army in order to maintain the rumors of him having a great force. As time went on, Hal's kingship was doubted and eventually challenged by his own son, Cal. Cal defeated Hal in a duel in the arena in the City of the Proud and was made the next king. Cal admired Crom for his militant achievement against the former king and journeyed to the hills of Crom. The new King Cal invited Crom to return to the Orcan city and join the Council of Elders. Full, formerly being the captain of the Proud Army, knew Crom well. He revered him and had sparred with him on many occasions. However, he had never won. As he recalled the history of the hills through which he presently walked, he spotted the settlement he had seen earlier. He was relieved the Orcan of Refuge did not inhabit the hills at that time. Due to his state, he might have been brought down without much of a fight, if surprised. Full was so deep in thought that he had not noticed he was walking on brown grass. He looked behind him, turning slowly so as not to lose his balance, and saw that he was well beyond the snowy hills, and had passed into the eastern region of Kruk. He frowned. The east had been the harbor of his enemies for a very long time, and now, to those he had sworn to fight against, he would look for refuge. Full limped his way toward the settlement. The sun was sinking behind him, and in the sky glimmered a pink light, drowning in dark clouds. Full could see movement in the settlement, but he could not decide what it was from. As Full closed in on the settlement, the movement tapered off, and everything became still. Full was then close enough to see the details of the settlement. Many small fires burned underneath pots of various smelling foods, one of which he recognized and admired as he drew near. Tents were scattered throughout the settlement in a seemingly unorganized manner. Full knelt beside one of the fires and placed Lar next to it, her head smashing against the ground as he released her. The jolt awoke Lar from a slumber brought on by her hunger and exhaustion. She shivered violently as the fire thawed her icy body. Full struggled to his feet, feeling the sting of his injury. He looked at a tent nearby, but as soon as his gaze met the door of the tent, the ragged structure shifted, and the opening was closed. Full felt a chill run from his lower back to his neck. He quickly turned to face another tent, and before the opening was closed, he met the glance of a pair of large green eyes. Full knew immediately these creatures were not Orcan. Full roared and challenged, "Come out!" "Yes, master. Apologies, my apologies, master," said a small voice from behind him. Full swung around, his fist clenched tightly to his axe. He saw before him a small greenish-yellow creature, kneeling with its head bowed to the ground. The creature's neck swelled and expanded, only to quickly deflate while letting out a loud croaking sound. Full recognized this being. It was a Trogan. The Trogan species are like frogs. Although they are much bigger than any actual frog, they are small in size compared to the Orcan. They average around 4 feet in height. They have a nimble bone structure, but are covered in fatty flesh. Their strength lies within their thick thighs, allowing them to quickly leap short distances, giving them a speed advantage. They have webbed hands and feet, which enable them to swim quickly underwater as well. They are intelligent creatures, but are practically unable to fight. Their species has been used for cooking, planting, and harvesting crops and gathering materials. "Toad! Why are you camped here?" Full demanded. "We are your servants, master," the frog persons replied, seeming to speak the Orcan language flawlessly. "How many are you?" "We are many. This pod is close to 50 of us. Additionally, there are dozens like it in and around the city." Full looked up from the short creature and glanced at the city before him. It was small and ragged and completely unlike the glory of Proud City. "This female requires sustenance," Full demanded. The Trogan looked down at a limp Lar. "What illness has befallen her?" "No illness. She froze during the night, and I know not of when she last ate." The Trogan, confused by Full's diagnosis, quickly scurried toward a large pot resting on hot coals. Another Trogan, without being spoken to, ran toward him with a wooden bowl in hand. The first Trogan's 2 green hands, with yellowish palms and webbed fingers, took hold of the bowl. He then dipped it into the pot and scooped up some hot broth. "If you could," the the Trogan said, gesturing with his head for Full to bring Lar to him. Full carefully balanced his weight as he bent down. He grabbed Lar by the arm and dragged her toward the Trogan. The Trogan squat next to Lar, and with one hand lifted her head, and with another he gently poured the broth into Lar's mouth. A croaking left the squatting Trogan again. The second Trogan ran over, took the bowl from the first, and continued the process. The first Trogan stood up and stepped toward Full. Her hands bear the mark of the savages. However, you do not, he said, as if asking a question. I am from the proud kingdom. I have come seeking refuge amongst the refuge Orcan. Nurse the female until she is well, and then send her to the city. Her fate will be the same as mine, whatever that is. Full began to walk on toward the city. Master, the Trogan interrupted, I think our meeting is not a coincidence. Full turned and met the green eyes of the Trogan. If you are not an Orcan of refuge, then you will not know the terrible conditions my kind are in. We are slaves, and have been treated as worse. Our kind is not like the Orcan. We barely survived the winter. As the ice crept its way down from the north, we could not perform our duties as well, and have not been able to meet the quotas King Gon has placed on us. Please be our protector and guide us out of this land of Krug. Full snarled. Your cares are not my own, he yelled as he turned toward the city again. You may keep the female, savage, he said in finale. Chapter 10. Doubts about the king. Cag, an elder of the Proud, walked briskly through the streets of Proud City on his way to the War Hall. The War Hall was a grand building near the center of Proud City, dedicated to, as its name suggests, war. It had several armories filled with thousands of massive axes and fearsome metal armor. It was attached to the barracks, where young Orcan would prepare themselves for the glory of battle. The war hall was in the shape of a circle, and had a massive arena in the center of it. The arena was used as a place for Orcan to spar and fight in great numbers, often for training. Surrounding the arena were seats, lined on an ascending angle for Orcan to spectate battles. Behind and above the rows of seats, on the northeast side, was a massive room that overlooked the arena. This room, called the War Chamber, was Cag's destination. All planning, mapping, and details pertaining to the Proud Orcans warring took place in that room. Only an elder, a captain, the commander of the Proud Army, and the king could enter this room. As war was the focus and crux of the Orcan lifestyle, the contents of that room were sacred to them. Cag took the east road from the king's throne room to the war hall. He was just outside the Hall of Legends, merely a few minutes south of the war hall, when he was intercepted by another elder. Hail, Cag, the elder said. You heard of my task. I have little time to spare, Duke, Cag replied shortly. Duke was an elder who had served the former king, Drak's uncle, along with Cag as the king's advisor, a prestigious position amongst the elders. Duke was smaller and younger than Cag. He was close to 7.5 centuries old, and some 200 years ago was demoted from being an elder to being a captain in the Proud Army after Drak became king. Drak required Duke to prove himself worthy of being an elder again. Thus, 50 years ago, Duke led his regime of elite warriors into Rock Valley, which had been heavily populated by refuge forces. He defeated all of them, pushing back the refuge territory vastly. The kingdom caused Duke to earn respect from King Drak, and he returned to his position as an elder. I will get to the reason for my speaking with you if you follow me. It will only take a moment. Cag reluctantly followed. He was eager to fulfill his duty to the king and make ready the plans for invading the Giram border. However, his respect for Duke gave him the allowance to follow him behind a nearby building. I am appreciative of your hearing me, Duke said. Speak. Cag You are highly revered amongst all Orkin. Many Orkin within the proud army have placed their loyalty with you. You are well beyond Drac in age and might, and could easily overthrow him as king. Cag was stunned by Duke's statement. What is the meaning of this? No king has ever disbanded the Council of Elders, Duke shouted at first, but quickly lowered his voice again. King Drac is making decisions that compromise the Orkin way. He is marching against the Girim, when our kingdom has been weakened by the savages. We have only just learned of their defeat. Should we not then take Rock Valley again, and the whole of the Dark Forest? Why fight north, when we could capture the middle of Kruk? It is mad! The savages are dead, defeated by the king you so easily are speaking treason against. We cannot defy him the way you suggest. Other elders might strike you down if they heard your speech, Cag exclaimed ferociously. The massacre of the savages is a great victory for the proud, and Drac has my respect for that, Duke continued. But moving north to attack an enemy whom we have not current strife with, when we ought to focus our efforts on reclaiming the center of Kruk, is absurd. The king is clearly enraged and has not the ability to think about what is best for his Orkin. The disbanding of the elders gives proof to his madness. Who will rule the Orkin and keep this great city functioning? The great city will not be populated, or will need ruling, Cag began in reply. Do you not recall? The king, your king, declared all Orkin to ready themselves for this state of war. All Orkin, meaning we will all bear arms under the leadership of our great king and crush our enemies. All of our enemies. Cag, why do you not see reason? You speak as a youth. I have briefly spoken with a few of the other elders, and they agree. Even your elder brother Crom is in accord with this plea. Challenge the king, kill him, and take his place as king of the Orkin. Cag knew he would prosper the kingdom if he were at the head. Duke, you remember the great King Darg, whom we both served? He remains to be the mightiest Orkin I have ever known. I have sparred with him regularly and was never able to defeat him. His kingship was true, and he was far stronger than I could ever be. Do you remember? I do, Duke replied. Then you would do best to remember that it was Drac who defeated him. Drac took the throne from Darg and became our king. If I could not defeat Darg in sparring, I certainly could not defeat his victor. Drac fell Darg in the shadows like a coward, Duke protested. No Orkin witnessed the battle. You have heard the tales of a black one running on the rooftops of this city. Perhaps Darg's death was not by the hand of Drac, but by a mysterious force we have yet to confront. Drac could have stepped in and claimed the king's death to have been caused by himself. You are an Orkin of conspiracies, Cag exclaimed. That Orkin, your king, just slaughtered an entire kingdom. Hundreds of enemy Orkin likely lined the floor of the Dark Forest, and Drac had not a scratch on him. He has earned his kingship, and he will keep it. Cag replied in finality. He walked back onto the road and headed toward the war hall. However, he greatly contemplated Duke's suggestion as he walked. After a few minutes, he entered the magnificent war hall. He was met with many bows of respect from training Orkin as he walked swiftly through its corridors. He ascended many flights of grand steps on his way to the war chamber. Once outside, he was recognized immediately by the 4 guards posted by the large metal door. The guards opened the door, and Cag entered the chamber. It was a grand room, rivaling that of the throne. The ceiling was close to twice the height of any Orkin, and the vast width of the room seemed unnecessary when considering its contents. A series of shelves ran across one of the walls. The shelves contained many scrolls, intentionally picked from the city's library. The scrolls were previous war accounts and battle tactics. The proud frequently referred to these scrolls for inspiration. The only other content of the large room was a massive table situated deeper into the chamber, closer to the window overlooking the arena. At the table stood the great King Drac, peering down at a map spread across the table. Another Orkin stood across from him, and that Orkin was a captain in the proud army, and oversaw all training, and he specialized in military tactics. Since Ful's supposed execution, Drac had yet to appoint a captain as the new commander, and when this captain saw Cag enter the room, he bowed his horned head. "Hail, King Drac! Hail, Captain Grom!" Cag said as he approached the table. "Cag," the king began, "I gather you did not make haste. Grom has devised a plan of battle for our raid on the Girim." The king gestured to Grom as if inviting him to continue. "Yes, my king," he spoke in a growling voice. "The stone people, as you have experienced in the past, win their battles by hiding in their mountainous fortress and drawing their enemy in. The fortress with the Girim waiting inside is impenetrable. However, due to the war we have been in with our traitorous Orcan kingdoms in the east, they have stretched their reach south. They have set up an encampment on our border, right next to the northwestern reaches of the Dark Forest." Grom pointed to the place on the map. "Elder Cag, my suggestion is you take a few hundred Orcan and get close to the encampment. King Drac will then sound the call of a horn. At that moment, you and your Orcan will attack the encampment, and be sure to sound your war horn also, drawing the attention of the fortress. I will send out a retaliation force to defend the encampment. Allow your forces to be beaten back slightly. Once they see you are but a few hundred, they will send out a smaller force. At this time, King Drac himself will have reached you. He and his armada of 2,000 will join the battle from behind, and due to his recent victory over the savages, will burst forth from the tree line of the Dark Forest, circling the Girim forces. If they send more of their forces out at a time, we will be able to defeat them. Because their defenses at the entrance of the city will be destroyed, we can perhaps surge through their gate." "I thought it was a mighty yet bold plan, Grom," Cag began in reply. "However, do we have 2,300 proud warriors at the ready? I have 500 warriors in the city. The loss of Foal's garrison in Rock Valley has spread us thin. It is unlikely their full army will be able to mobilize due to the harsh winter we have endured. The snow is melting in Crook, but their country will take a longer time to thaw. Due to the scale of the mountain itself," Drac began in addition, "I would be very surprised if they could get the northern defenses at their south entrance before we had entered the mountain." "Very well," Cag agreed. "I will leave the city with my warriors in the darkness of this coming night. We will hide in the dark forest until we hear the blow of your horn, Drac." "Good," Drac replied. "Grom, have those forces ready by dawn. Cag will leave as darkness falls, and I will leave once our forces are ready and sound the horn in the darkness of the second night, and then we will attack. We will see the end of the equality in strength between the Orcan and the Girim at last. And Grom, leave the raid to Cag and I." "My king," Grom questioned. "I have lost trust in the elders," Drac continued, "and I will need you to ensure the city is properly being prepared for war. See to it the proud villages to the west are readied as well. Once we have crippled the Girim, we will move eastward and reclaim Kruk." "Yes, my king." "Cag," said the king, "send for Elder Duke. Have him join your forces tonight. Go and prepare your 300. "Yes, my great king," Cag said, realizing the dangerous state of mistrust and strange leadership the proud city and the kingdom he belonged to was now in. Chapter 11. Loyal Obedience. Without a cloud in the sky, the warmth of the sun soothed Lara's red skin. Full had not been gone for more than a few hours before she had recovered from the freeze of the previous night. Having now consumed a large portion of the Trogan's broth, she slowly gained in strength and awareness as she lay next to the fire. "I have never heard of an Orcan freezing," the first frog person who had spoken with Full said. Lara stared back at him with a blank expression. The Trogan took the opportunity to study her face. He had never seen an Orcan that young before, though she was twice his own age. Despite her age, she still had sharp bones piercing through her cheeks and small horns on her bald head. "I suppose you are too young to have taken a life," the Trogan said aloud, but continued the rest in thought. He was always told the Orcan had a fire burning in their chest, which caused them to have great rage, leading to many conflicts. The rumors say, the more an Orcan fights, the hotter the fire burns. The myth persisted for so long, some believed the Orcan did not even have a physical heart, but rather just an open flame that ignites when they have fought for the first time. Perhaps she is the one, he thought. Lar lay before him still, as if unaware of his question. Perhaps being raised in that forest has led to her being of a lesser mind, he thought. The Orcan were an incredibly astute race. Their broad selection of words and sentence structure allowed for very little misunderstanding amongst their ranks. More recently, and for reasons unknown to most, the sect of Orcan, led by Hag, did not educate their young as extensively as other Orcan kingdoms. The savagery brought on by the Lost One's dark gift led the savages to apathy toward such things. The gift slowly led one's mind to sheer madness. "What is your name?" the Trogan asked, breaking the silence. Lar perked her head. "My name is Lar," she said for the first time. Identifying herself brought a feeling of contentment to her. She sat up quickly. "Where is Full?" she pressed the Trogan. "He left a few hours ago. He is on his way to the city." "Which way?" The Trogan pointed east toward the city. "Please," he began. "I do not think our paths crossing is a coincidence. My name is Noma, and I need your help." "Your cares are not my own," she yelled as she frantically scrambled to her feet and ran off in the direction of her leader. Her muscles were weak and sore, but she pushed herself forward. Her bare feet were incredibly calloused from the harsh terrain inside the dark forest. With the combination of Full's limp and her determined sprint, she caught up with him within less than half an hour. She saw his silhouette in the distance, the city gate but a mile in front of him. "Full!" she shouted as she began her final sprint toward him. Full turned around and growled with anger as he saw Lar approach. "Go back!" he shouted. Lar toppled before his feet and bowed her head low to the ground. "Please," she began, panting heavily. "I am your servant. You have my loyalty," she continued panting, taking deep breaths as she knelt before him. "I wish to follow you," she said. "No!" Full yelled furiously. "I refuse your loyalty. You shall not be loyal to anyone except to your own survival. You shall exhaust your life doing deeds for those to whom you have given your loyalty, and sometime after you have given all you can give, you will discover this. No one is worth your loyalty, not the mightiest of kings and not me." Lar gazed up at him. She felt a shattering wave flow through her chest. "Go back to those frogs. They require your help, and I have given you to them." Full stooped down, took hold of Lar's arm, and hoisted her to her feet. She was still and looked up at him, standing 3 feet below him. "Will I see you again?" she asked. "Never," he replied fiercely. "Now leave." The command brought forth conflict within Lar. As she despairingly watched her leader walk away from her, she felt a strong urge to turn the other way and head back to the Trogan, and she did, not out of kindness for them, but rather in loyal obedience to Full. The long walk had taken its toll on Full's leg. He felt the burning sensation of blood pumping toward where his bone was broken, and at the same time he felt the icy chills of pain thrust their way up his spine. He found a place to rest for the remainder of the day, in a small patch of trees with a series of large rocks mingling within. It was only midday, but he was limping so severely he would not dare present himself that week before the Orcan of Refuge. He would wait until the next morning, allowing his leg adequate time to continue its healing. The clouds had made their appearance, offering Lar some shade from the beating of the midday sun. She was not used to experiencing it in such force, as the dark forest had always offered protection from all the extremes Kruk had to offer. When a severe wind swept in and smashed against the land, Lar was never moved. When heavy snow or rain poured down relentlessly upon other Orcan kingdoms, Lar found shelter under the thick canopy of leaves. And when freezing air stopped all possible comfort from those dwelling in cities, the vast network of fires kept Lar warm. She had now faced only a few of the elements and longed for the forest. Her longing was drowned by the shattering truth of her abandonment. Yet her abandonment was triumphed by her new command, to aid the Trogan. When Lar had found her way back to the Trogan camp, the pots of broth were still bubbling over the fire. She caught wind of the smell, and only then did she realize her hunger. She found a bowl and helped herself. It is interesting such an uncultured Orcan like yourself would still have a taste for broth. Noma's voice softly sounded from behind her. Lar turned and faced him, still sipping the broth. How so? She managed to ask. What is a broth made from the bones of deer? I hear the savages eat their meat raw. Yes, I have, but this has a better taste, Lar replied gently. It is favored by most Orcan. It must be something of an instinct if even you enjoy it. The Trogan gestured for her to sit down with him. But I suppose you would have eaten your fair share of strange meal while being raised. You have probably even hunted something yourself before. I have yet to spill the blood of anything, Lar replied. Never? You truly are a different Orcan indeed. Noma stood up swiftly. Perhaps you are exactly the way you are for a purpose, to lend your aid to my kind. For which other reason would you have returned? Lar was taken aback. Did Full speak with this Trogan and inform him of his command for her? What kind of aid do you require? She asked. While still speaking, a murmur broke out amongst the camp. Trogans spilled from and ran into different tents. Vast amounts of croaking accompanied the rush as well. You must come with me immediately, Noma said while taking hold of Lar's hand. When she rose, she towered over the small Trogan and almost had to bend over to keep holding his webbed hand. What is happening? The broth, Noma began. It was never meant for you. We have been expecting a visit from the Orcan of Refuge all day. It is only now that they are arriving. He led her quickly to a nearby tent. If they found you, they would either end you or take you from us. Lar got on her knees and crawled into the tent. Noma closed the flap and whispered, Please stay here, and do not make a sound. I cannot afford to lose you. I will explain everything to you once the inspection team is gone. The croaking immediately stopped. Noma ran toward a pot of broth and waited. 7 Orcan, all close to 11 feet tall, marched into the camp. They were wearing full metal armor like the Proud. They were, however, from the Refuge Kingdom. Report, Toad, the head of the group gnarled to Noma. Yes, my master, Noma said, bowing his head low to the ground. We have harvested the crops from last quarter. Our yield is far greater than that of last year's. In fact, it seems the winter has not affected our production. Is this the truth? Another Orcan spouted. Yes, master. The early winter caused for an earlier mount, which saw an increase in moisture for our crops. I wish to see the stores of potatoes and beets, the first Orcan demanded. Yes, master, of course. But first, you must know, an Orcan was here not long ago. He seemed to be of the Proud military. What? The first Orcan shouted. Where is he now? Lar overheard the conversation. She cringed as she mourned the secrecy of Full's approach. She feared for his safety, knowing these Orcan could take advantage of his injured state and defeat him. She did not know of the political differences between the kingdoms. She just knew they were all enemies. He left for King Gon half a day ago. He came with news from the dark forest regarding the savages. Noma knew exactly which strings to pull when it came to the tensions between the Orcan. He was old for a Trogan and wise and knew his way around the truth. He was injured. He could not have ventured very far. With that, the 7 Orcan were off, charging in the direction of Full. The croaking broke out again. Lar crawled out of the small tent she hid in and stood to her feet. She saw dozens of Trogans scattering off in all directions, leaping great distances as opposed to running. What is happening? She asked Noma, who had just made his way to find her. I have lied, he began. We have not yielded a very good crop this year. No Trogan pod has. It is likely this very team has slaughtered many Trogan today because of it. I could not see the same fate befall my pod. As I mentioned, I need your help. We are slaves of the Orcan, and until now we have not had a way of freedom. But now our way is you. You are an Orcan, and you can guide us to a land of peace, where those who seek true refuge from war are said to find it. Guide, she replied. You must be mistaken, for I know nothing beyond those woods over there. She pointed to the dark forest. You do not need to know where it is, Lar.
Proud City is the oldest Orcan city. It has a library of sorts, which will contain not only a map of Kruk, but of all lands surrounding it. Because you are an Orcan, you can enter the city and steal such a map, and with it we can find our way to the peaceful land." Lara gazed into the green eyes of the being before her. She had previously been of no importance to anyone. She was merely another mouth to feed, with the hope of one day becoming a hunter and a mate to any warrior that should choose her. Not only did she long to help out of her obedience to Full, but now for her own sense of purpose. "I will help you, Noma. Your pod's fate will be my own. Lar, I could never thank you enough. However, it is not just my pod you will be helping. You will save us all. That is where those Trogan went to. They are going to the other pods to inform them of our departure and to invite them." "Where will everyone hide while I venture into Proud City?" Lar asked. Depending on our numbers," Noma began, but stopped himself. "To tell you the truth, I have not thought of that part of the plan yet. We may have to answer that question when we are faced with it." Winter had released its grasp upon the area where Full had taken rest. The grass was dry and the breeze was warm. Full had peacefully slept for close to 2 hours now. Under extreme circumstances, an Orcan could go an entire week without resting, contributing to their being the perfect warrior. However, due to Full's injury, he knew the only way his body could heal itself was if he slept. The clanking of the metal boots stomping against the ground awoke him. The noise of several Orcan approaching was still far off. Full sprung to his feet, his axe still in hand, and located those who were approaching. He counted 7 Orcan, each being of a smaller build. They were dressed completely in battle armor and carried large axes. He recognized the symbol engraved on their breastplates. "Refuge," he whispered in disgust, his old allegiances still in his mind's forefront. His first instinct was to climb one of the trees and wait until his attackers were below him. He would then descend upon them and end their lives before they were even aware of his presence. He ruled out that possibility, knowing the landing could very well cause his leg to be permanently wounded. He had hurt it enough that past day, and any further strain could solidify the damage. He surveyed the area, hoping to find inspiration for his ambush. Nothing came to him. He looked back at the Orcan, then only half a mile away. Finally, the idea arrived in his mind. The Anima Orcan had arrived at the small patch of trees. They had not come across the Orcan they were searching for on their way from the Trogan camp, and they could not see him approaching the city. They deduced he must have been hiding within the trees. They poised their axes and slowly walked toward the patch of trees, ready to attack. "At ease, Orcan," Full said as he stepped out from behind a tree. "I surrender." Surrender. An act Full had sworn he would never do. Yet the past few days had been filled with actions and thoughts Full would never have imagined. "I am the lead warrior in the resource division of the Refuge Army," said the same Orcan who had spoken with Noma. "I demand you tell me who you are, where you are from, and why you are here." "I will only speak with your king," Full replied. "Take me to him now." The 7 other Orcan moved closer, holding their axes tightly. "You dare command me?" the frustrated refuge warrior yelled. "You will die for this." With that, the 7 Orcan attacked Full without care, keeping him alive.
Chapter 12. To Warring Cities. Darkness had taken its dismal hold on the land of Kruk. Any advancement made by the approaching spring was pushed back by the cold that crept its way into the night. The proud elder, Cag, and his garrison had made it to the border of the dark forest, were entering into the very forest that once harbored their enemy. "Be on guard," Elder Duke's voice slid its way through the lines of Orcan. There could still be savage warriors in these woods, not to mention the deadliness of anything that moves in this forest. Cag led the march. "Duke," he summoned, "draw near." "Have you seen something?" Duke asked. "No." "Have you still your doubts about the king?" "Yes, I do." "Do you not?" Duke asked. "He has disbanded a sacred part of our culture. He being king for the past 200 years does not mean he can undo what millennia of kings have done before him." His madness is being revealed in that he has accused us of poring over old maps when he besieged us to. We were the ones who set in motion the battle that brought the end to the savages. It was our messenger who challenged Hag and his army to fight in Rock Valley. We lost that battle, remember? And we honor Full in his death and his contribution to the cause of the proud, Cag said. However, despite his faithful service, his garrison was destroyed. No credit for the savages' defeat belongs to us. That does not change the fact that he has mocked our efforts to this war. Duke raised his voice in anger. Quiet, Cag whispered sharply, hitting his arm against Duke's chest to stop his movement. Ahead. Do you see it? I do, Duke replied, his gaze fixed ahead at a small fire, still barely lit. It was weak, but it sent bright red light against the surrounding trees. A savage camp, Duke whispered. They slowly approached the small clearing wherein the fading fire lay. Or what is left of it, Cag said as he came into the clearing. The clearing looked as if a raging bull had stormed its way through, tearing up tents, knocking down trees, and digging into the dirt. The wrath of the great King Drac manifested, Cag declared loudly so as to encourage the loyalty of the proud warriors he led. Or rather, the chaos. Duke's voice drifted away as he stared in bewilderment at the scene before him. We keep moving. We must be ready to attack by dawn, Cag commanded his garrison as he marched past the signs of destruction and headed north toward the Giram. A few dozen? That is all willing to join us? Noma frantically asked. Yes, the rest fear the risks are too great, another Trogan replied. That Trogan had just returned from speaking with all those who ventured to the other pods around Refuge City. Risks? We will die if we stay. The Orcan are even more unforgiving than this winter has been. Noma looked up at Lar. It matters not. The important thing is that we gave them the opportunity to save themselves. It grieves me to ponder that so many Trogan will perish, but the arrival of these few dozen marks a time to depart. I think it would be best if we ventured to the dark forest, Lar said to Noma. I believe the report that my Orcan are all gone, which leaves the coasts of the forest a good enough place for you and the rest of the pod to hide while I get the map. That may work, however. Is the forest not a dangerous place even without the savage threat? Noma asked. Because of our presence, Lar began, not many of the dangerous creatures have ventured toward the tree line. It has only been a day, so I imagine the coastal region will be safe for you. Very good, very good. Noma walked past Lar and began croaking loudly to all the other Trogan in the camp. They stopped what they were doing and watched him as he croaked on. He raised his small green arms and paced as if giving a grand speech. Lar stood behind him, completely oblivious to what he was saying. Noma's croaking came to a halt and was followed by one loud, unified croak from the pod. With that, they all started on their way. A few finished packing their belongings into small bags, and a few began to leap in the direction of the dark forest. Trogans survive off of insects, and due to the winter's melt, there would soon be an abundance of insects cultivating in the pools of melted snow. The Trogan were able to journey with only minimal supplies brought, as they required very little. Lar was amazed at how the Trogan traveled. They were not bound to the 2 legs she was. They crouched down and sprang forward, traveling many feet through the air. The Trogan pod, with Lar running next to Noma as best she could, hopped along at a steady pace on their way to the southern reaches of the dark forest. Full walked through Refuge City's gate with confidence. He knew what he carried meant no one would challenge him. The layout of the city was similar to that of Proud City, yet it lacked in detail and grandeur. Proud was engraved with history's markings, brought forth from thousands of years. Refuge had not even aged itself 200, and that was easily seen by Full. The structures were mainly made out of wood, not stone, and when they were, it was a stacked bricks as opposed to being carved. Full saw a larger structure that resembled that of the king's throne room. The city of the Proud featured a large pillar that rose above the city's walls. The natural hill Proud was fashioned on allowed for an inclined walkway to lead to the base of the pillar. That pillar housed the throne room wherein the king and the elders sat. Refuge's mimic was a tall, square wooden building. Because the city was built on a plain, had not the grand slope to bring forth any anticipation. Full found his way to the entrance and faced 2 guards. Their fate was similar to that of the inspection team that had been searching for him. Full did not feel it necessary to explain himself to the guards. They also were not fond of what they saw him dragging. Full kicked the doors open. He was met with a dozen or so Orcan gazing at him in surprise. One of them, sitting on a throne, was the King of Refuge, Gon. Full, formerly of the Proud military, Full began an introduction. He threw 7 breastplates on the floor before the king's throne, each chest piece bearing the mark of refuge. At your service, he said with a sort of grin as he bowed his head. What is this? Gon exclaimed, standing up from his throne. Full, why have you come here? I have abandoned King Drac and have come to you for refuge. I imagine your abandoning had something to do with your failure in Rock Valley, Gon said. I believe Drac would have ended you had he known you survived. That is not entirely how events have occurred, Full replied. Yet you may ponder what you wish. The truth beheld is that I need a king to serve, and you need more military members. Or should I remind you that you just lost 7 of them? Gon growled at Full. I was the commander of the Proud army, Full continued. You know your warriors would benefit from my training. I am not requesting a position of command. Simply, I ask that you take advantage of my expertise and give me purpose once again. Agreed, Gon said quietly. But I will need time to consider your offer. Prove your sincerity by going to the dungeon. You will stay there until I have decided. The dungeon, protested Full. Gon laughed. Yes, we are not like Proud. We do not promote Orcan for slaying Orcan. We punish Orcan for slaying Orcan. Or have you never heard of the civility of the outside nations? Full wanted to yell something like, We are Orcan. We do not bow to other nations and races, nor do we look to them for morality. But he kept such thoughts to himself, for he perceived Gon was a different king than Drac. If he wanted to stay in refuge, he would have to play along with the way Gon ran things. But he did not want to stay in refuge if Gon was this kind of king. No different than the pathetic races that speckled the earth outside of the land of Kruk. Full wanted an Orcan king. He wanted someone strong to be loyal to. So he would be obedient for a time and report to the stockade as King Gon had demanded. But Full would look for a strong king to submit to, an Orcan, even if that was his own self. And so Full's journey will continue in the next book as he joins a new side of the war in the Kingdom of Chaos. The blackness of night had faded, and dawn lit the Hall of Legends. The vast series of windows crowning the perimeter of the structure allowed for luminous cascades of light to dance through the grand hall. Drac stood facing a king statue. It featured the king who reigned before him, King Darg. Drac at one time revered Darg and served in his military. Darg was a brute of an Orcan. He stood 15 feet tall and was a fierce warrior. He was the younger brother of Cal, Drac's father. Darg, having no regard for family ties, as an Orcan should, challenged and defeated his own brother, taking his place as king. He also took his brother's widow, Jul, as his own. From that union came Gan and Dal, both of whom are of the current kings in Kruk. However, Darg mysteriously passed away. Drac stood up to say he was the one who challenged and slew Darg, his own uncle. However, no Orcan saw the duel take place. Therefore, his brother, Hag, and 2 half-brothers, Gan and Dal, challenged Drac's claim to the throne. But with 3 strong Orcan challenging, and with the remains of brotherly affection for one another, no battle was had. They usurped from Drak's kingdom, taking their loyal Orcan with them. Each of these 3 built for themselves rival kingdoms in opposition to Drak's reign. The Orcan of Kruk have been at war with themselves since the sudden passing of King Darg. Drak mournfully recalled the event when the unity of the Orcan was shattered. He felt rage burn within him as he considered the thousands of Orcan who lived throughout Kruk and refused to serve him. His thoughts stretched north toward the Girim country, an entire country resting upon the border of Kruk. It was a country filled with weak beings who thought themselves above the power of the Orcan. It was a kingdom whose king's very breath defied the strength of Drak. He felt his thoughts thicken, as if they were wading through mud. The maddening rage swelling within his mind imprisoned all that may have granted Drak rationality. He needed to fight soon. "How dare you, Drak?" a voice stabbed through the bustle of the king's mind. He turned around to see Jul, his mother, approaching him. "I told you to destroy the Orcan usurpers who are challenging your rule, yet you have sent a regime of proud warriors north to fight the stone people, and I have heard you intend to take 2 legions more with you this very morning." She yelled at Drak, furious and confused. "Silence!" Drak yelled. He stepped toward her and struck her. The force of his strike sent her to the stone floor. She gasped in utter surprise. No son should ever strike his mother. No king should ever strike an elder. No male should ever strike a female. These were core rules to the Orcan society, as well as countless other species that dwelt on Earth. And yet, this son, this king, this male, this Orcan did so. And he did so without apology. "How dare I?" Drak began, standing over his mother like a true monster. His voice thunderously filled the grand hall. "How dare you? I am the king, yet you have spoken to me as if I were still your Orkling. None of these great kings would have ever stood for such blasphemous behavior toward them, even from their mothers. And yet, Orcan have not the care for any bond beyond that of their loyalty to the king and a king to his kingdom. How is it that you have loosened my mind to be pliable to your suggestions?" He gazed at her, and even if her skin were as white as snow, he would have seen it as red, for the swelling madness had returned. Drak was well embracing the lost one's dark gift. Joel stared at her son, and King's now red eyes. She felt her schemes and plots crumble as she faced the impending reality that she had lost the proud kingdom. The rage she saw in Drak was unlike anything she had ever seen. Drak grinned his teeth and marched away. Before he left the hall, he turned to give a final command. "Leave Proud City at once. We shall both regret it if I ever see you here again." Drak had at last proven to himself, and to the closest family member he had, that he was an Orcan. He did not hold affectionate ties to his family, even his mother. He was an Orcan warrior and a true Orcan king. But to obtain this proof, Drak had traded what made the Orcan even slightly honorable. His loyalty was then to darkness. That would be the last time Drak and Joel would speak to each other for a very, very long time. The next time would be in an entirely different land, and they would have entirely different names, and they will be serving the same king.
Chapter 13. Within Proud City. It was still dark when Lar, Noma, and the rest of the Trogan pod reached the dark forest. No one perished, but some came close to it on the journey through the night.
The freezing air caused many Trogan to begin freezing. The cold blood within them became layered with ice and caused their limbs to stop functioning. Most of the larger Trogan were still able to travel and carried the disabled the rest of the way. For the majority of the journey, Lara carried 4 Tadlings, young Trogan, in her arms. The very moment they were able to find safety in the dark forest trees, Lara began building fires. She was well seasoned in this ability, having been a savage. She created dozens of fires, offering warmth and salvation to the entire pod.
Their plan to have Lar travel alone into Proud City then became the only possibility, as even Noma required rest from the tasking night. "I shall waste no time," Lar whispered to Noma. "I fear we will not survive another night. We must travel south as soon as we can." "Agreed," Noma replied, shivering as he attempted to smile. Lar, not too familiar with the facial expression of smiling, copied him. Noma laughed at her humorous attempt. "Where is the library you spoke of?" she asked. "I have never actually been in the city, so I am not sure. You speak the same language they do. Once you are inside, find an Orcan who does not look like they wish to attack you and ask them." Lar scowled at Noma. "And how will I get past those guarding the entrance to the city?" "You are a clever gal," Noma replied. "You will think of something." "Gal?" Lar asked, unfamiliar with the word. Noma laughed again. "It means young female, as in yourself. Now please go, Lar. It will be light soon, and thank you, dear one. You shall save us." Lar nodded at Noma and then ran off. They had entered the south side of the forest, north of the hills of Crom. Not far west plunged Rock Valley, and past there sat Proud City. The spiked hill that composed the west side of Rock Valley blocked the sight of the city from Lar. Since Drac defeated the savages, the Proud had established their military in the valley again. To go unseen, she used narrow passageways and hid behind boulders to pass to the other side. And once she was on the other side of the valley, she saw the city for the first time. It was unlike anything she could have imagined, and grand beyond her ability to describe. She narrowed her view down to the gate, a grand entrance with large iron doors which seemed to be attached to either side of a massive, hollowed boulder. The outer sides of the boulder were attached to the large wall. The wall ran as far around the city as Lara could see. She saw, at the foot of the gates, a large crowd of Orcan entering the city. She quickly ran toward the crowd. They had all made their way into the city by the time Lara had gotten there. The doors were still open, however. 24 proud soldiers stood guarding the entrance. "Have you answered the king's call to join the fight?" one of them bellowed to Lar. "The fight?" she asked as she quickly put her hands behind her back. She remembered Noma mentioning the black markings on her hands being an identifier for those of the Savage Kingdom. She did not want to risk them learning of her being an enemy. "King Drac has called all those loyal to him to join a fight that will end our war between the Girim and the pathetic Orcan in the east." Lar immediately thought of Fol, and how he planned on joining the Orcan of Refuge. If he were still alive, he would soon not be if that kingdom was attacked. "Yes, I have," she replied confidently. She had never told a lie before that day. The Orcan know nothing of lying. It is against their nature to avoid honesty. Honesty amongst the military ranks of the Orcan leads to clear communication, which in turn creates a more unified army. Lar, however, had observed Noma lying to the Orcan patrol, and in turn they did not kill the entire pod. She was then able to disobey her instinct and listen to her experience. "Enter," the proud warrior said as he stepped aside. Lar walked past the guards and into the city. As she went through the gateway, she looked at the thickness of the doors. They were almost 2 feet thick. She continued on, the feeling of guilt haunting her as she realized she had doubted Fol's ability to protect himself. The distance she had from him began to contribute to her loyalty to him fading. After the entrance of the city, there lay a large courtyard with a dozen or so roads leading from it. The courtyard was lit by several large fires burning in large metal baskets throughout the area. The place was filled with Orcan, who had journeyed from the western reaches of the kingdom to join the war. The center of the courtyard featured a massive stone statue of an Orcan, about 40 feet tall. Orange light from the fires displayed the bottom of the statue, while the dim light from the coming dawn revealed the top of the statue. A large plaque at the foot of the statue read, "The great and mighty King Mac, noble founder of this glorious city, a monument to remind all of the unity found in war and under our sovereign king." Lar gazed in wonder at the magnificence of the statue and the city beyond. She stood still for a few minutes, captivated by the grandeur. With her mind back on its path, she took hold of the bottom of her dress and tore 2 wide strips off. She used the strips of wool to wrap around her hands and forearms, covering the markings.
She scanned the courtyard, looking for someone who might be able to direct her to the library. After a few minutes, she spotted someone wearing clothing that was different from the others. All the other Orcan were wearing armor and holding weapons, but that one was not. That Orcan was wearing a long brown cloak with a blue sash draped over his shoulder. Lar made her way to the Orcan. "Hail," she said. "Are you able to direct me to the library?" The Orcan turned to face her. He had an old face that was wrinkled and faded. He was certainly the oldest Orcan Lar had ever seen. "And why would an Orkling like yourself find interest in the old library at such a time as this?" "I am interested in finding a map of Kruk to better familiarize myself with the land and its neighboring countries. This will aid me as I join the war," Lar said. "It is indeed a different age, if female Orcan are joining the ranks of warriors. However, this is by the order of the king," he replied, gazing at the crowd of Orcan in the courtyard. "The second road to the right of the gate will lead you to the library. It is one of the buildings attached to the war hall." Lar nodded and turned toward the direction of the road. "Orkling," the elder said. Lar turned her head to face him. "What is your name? Who is your father?" "My name is Lar, and I have no father. What is yours?" The elder, puzzled by her response, replied, "My name is Krom, and I am an offspring of Karsh." He said this as if it were meaningful to Lar, and it would be to almost any Orcan except her.
This was Elder Krom, the great Krom who fought in the hills of Krom, named after him. Lar turned back in the direction of the library and quickly walked through the courtyard and onto the second road. It was a strange fate that brought Lar and Krom's paths to cross that day, for Krom himself was to depart on a very long journey, one that would, in many years to come, have a devastating effect on Lar. Lar made her way up to the road with haste. She gained a broad understanding of the breadth of the city as she journeyed deeper within it. She was stopped by no Orcan and did not seem to raise any attention. Noma's plan was proceeding smoothly.
By the time she reached the library, the sun had risen over the land of Kruk, offering its guidance. She stood before the massive arena, stretching a mile in either direction. The large structure had many buildings attached to the outside of it, one of them being the library. Lar found it almost effortlessly, for it had a large image of a scroll carved into its wooden doors. The building was of medium size and accessible from the road and from within the hall itself. "You are different, are you not?" a small voice asked from behind her.
Lar turned around and saw a male Orkling, half her size, approaching her. His stance was bold, and he had his hands behind his back. "How do you mean?" she asked in return. "Take the cloth around your hands off," he demanded. "No," she replied. "Why should I? I am almost 10 years of age, and I have not fought anyone yet. If I am to please the king, I must fight soon," he said, stepping closer. "And you behave differently from other proud Orklings. I have followed you since you left the courtyard, and you look at this city as if you have never been here before." "Many of us from all over have come to answer the king's call to fight," Lar replied. "All of whom would have ventured to the city before," he said. Lar started to take steps backward. She felt anxious as the Orkling continued to walk toward her. "The cloth around your hands," he began. "Are they hiding your savage markings?" Lar gasped. "I knew it. Imagine how proud the king will be when he learns of me defeating a savage." The Orkling pulled his hands from behind his back, revealing a large stone. He charged at Lar and leapt on top of her. She fell to the ground beneath him as he mounted his legs on top of her, pinning her down. With one hand he held the stone, and with the other he tore the cloth from her wrists, revealing the savage markings. Suddenly, a bright light shone around them. The Orkling was blinded by it, and dropped the stone so that it landed behind him.
He covered his eyes, which were then burning, and he shrieked. Lars saw through the light. She was unaffected by its brightness and heat, but she was saved by it. She shoved the Orkling off her and scrambled to her feet. The boy rolled away, weeping for the great pain he felt in his eyes. Lar looked around her, wondering about the light. It felt familiar, and it looked familiar too, as if it were fog or smoke. She could see it all around her, but she could also see that it was coming from somewhere. It was like a strong pillar of light that shone from one single point. Nobody else in Proud City saw the great pillar descending from the top of a distant mountain. Lars saw the mountain peak through the shining light. It stood far, the immediate peak that rose from the northern reaches of the dark forest, her old home. She had lived in the shadow of that mountain her entire life, but she had never climbed it, for the trek was many, many weeks through the forest and steepening rocky terrain. On top of the mountain there stood a stranger, a large being hunched over, leaning on a staff. She could see him distantly, only his outline. He wore a hood, and she thought he was smiling. Not because she could see his face, but she felt it. She felt his emotions, love, joy, hope. She had a brief memory, only for a moment. Then she had a brief thought, only for a moment. Rue had saved her again. Instinctively, she wanted to call out for this lost companion of hers, one she did not even know she knew. But her eyes gazed beyond him, for he was not the light. He only stood in it. The light shone from behind him, brighter and stronger. As soon as she took her eyes off Rue and looked further at the glory that shone behind him, his memory faded from her again. He vanished from her sight, as did the distant mountain, and in a few moments the light was gone too. She saw her surroundings once more. This time, Proud City looked bleak and dark. She would have cried if she knew what she had seen and what it meant for her. She would have chased after it, running into the forest and perishing before she made it to the incline. Therefore, it was for her protection that she remembered nothing. And so, she returned to the mission at hand, save the Trogan. She would see that light again, however, but not until her current task was complete. The end. The story is just getting started. Connect with the author to stay up to date on the next book release. Author's note. Thank you for reading this book. I hope it was worth it, and I hope you will get a copy of the next book, Little Kingdoms Book 2, War in Chaos. This story is ongoing and huge. The whole point of Little Kingdoms is for me to write about God and how he saves us from depravity. He does so of his own will and his own pleasure, and because of his love for us. This concept is really hard to understand, but it's true, and it is so wonderful that the entire world has been changed and will continue to be changed by the gospel of Jesus Christ. Born in Chaos was a difficult place to start, because we very much start with the bad guys of the Little Kingdom series. But there's a reason for that. We're all bad guys, in a sense. We've all sinned against a holy God. And if you're super young, maybe you think you haven't sinned against God. And that may be true, but trust me, you will. You see, when God gives us the choice between choosing him and choosing our sin, we will always choose our sin. It was that way for me, at least. But God is so loving, forgiving, and rich in mercy that he has decided to forgive us, putting all the punishment we deserve for our sin on his one and only Son, Jesus Christ. That's the gospel.
While Little Kingdoms does not have a Christ character in the story, this long tale does convey the truths of Christ in the circumstances and characters. You might call this an allegory. If you did, you could say Rue is like a prophet, bringing the word of God to depraved people. You could also say he is like the Holy Spirit, guiding and preserving his people even before we know about him. You could say the depraved Lar is us.
Born amongst savages. You could also say the proud Full is us too, confused and conflicted, longing for more but never finding it. Until that is, we find God. Or better put, God opens our eyes to see His goodness. Sorry, that was a bit of a spoiler for Full's future. There are good things ahead. Thanks again for reading this. Keep reading. Keep learning about God. I know Little Kingdoms is just a small bit of writing, but I hope it helps you understand how awesome God is and how great His salvation is. Until Book 2, God bless. Sincerely, Elijah Mackenzie Buchan.
Hey there, my name is Elijah. I write Christian fiction for Christians. I do all of this on my spare time in between raising my 4 kids with my wonderful wife, working full-time, and engaging in relationships with fellow Christians. I've got a lot of projects on the go, some very exciting ones too. Maybe you were frustrated with some of the low-quality moments of this audio. I record it all on my iPhone. It's not the best, but it's what I've got. If you enjoy these types of stories and the mission I'm on to write good Christian fiction in all genres, then please consider supporting me in this work at patreon.com or by telling a friend about my channel and my books. Now, most of my books on Amazon are sold at cost. It's a silly strategy, I know, but I hope my books will only bless the readers. So until the next one, please take care and never stop living Christianly. I hope to help Christ change the world one book at a time, even if I encourage a handful of families from my work. That's worth the effort. God bless you.